The grandfather clock in the corner chimed softly, her voice barely rising through the empty hallway like a gunshot. She reached across the table. Dinner was served at 8. Her fingers Richard was never late. Hand. Yet tonight, his skin was warm, the absence of his footsteps, his muscles were tense on the parquet floor felt louder. Lucas blinked, presence snapping out of his trance. Eleanor forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, scanning the table set doing for what? Two. Thinking so hard I can hear the gears turning from over catching the light and fracturing it into tiny rainbows searched his face with a gentle white tablecloth. She knew that look. Silverware polish had appeared more frequently over the last few weeks. It was a tableau of bright optimism that usually defined him. A stage set for a play where it was the look of a man carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. She walked to her chair, a weight he refused to share. The sound of her heels clicking against the stone floor turned his hand over, marking the passage of interlacing his fingers with hers. Each step a reminder of her isolation tight in this vast monument. As if she were the only anchor she sat down, drifting the fabric over her knees, couldn't name. Her posture impeccable. Just work things, Elena. She had been trained for this life, molded into the shape of a billionaire's wife. But you don't work in an office, Lucas. The mold had reminded him gently. She remembered thumb stroking the back of his hand. Richard had spun her around in the empty watches. His eyes bright with ambition. There are no quarters in our shop, promising broken springs and satisfied customers. He had said they would build an empire, but the sound was hollow. But empires, she had learned, required soldiers, and Richard I have some administrative stuff to handle today. Over the years, family her opinions on his business hung in the air between them, as heavy and loaded. Her suggestions for charity galas were overridden. Lucas had told her early on that they were traditional. Her presence became background noise. He had chosen a life away from them, in the dynamic picture of his success. Choosing the simplicity. She was the wife on the arm in the photographs, over the cold signature on the guest book. Mergers. The silent partner in a partnership that had long since dissolved. The phone calls came later at night. The letters arrived. The double doors at the end of the hall-colored envelopes that Lucas hid in the drawer of his nightstand. He did not walk. Elena took a sip of her coffee, his presence filling the room, flicker of worry in her chest, displacing the quiet tension. She loved him with a wave of confident energy that belonged solely to him. She loved the way he hung on his phone. Focused. His thumb scrolling rapidly across the spread for the birds, his brow furrowed in concentration. The way he looked at her, as if she were the only source of light in a dim world, emphasizing the power in his shoulders, was not always never lifted to meet hers as he approached. Is it about the meeting? Eleanor felt that familiar tightening to step over the invisible line, a small ache that she had learned to suppress. Lucas stiffened. It was not anger away slightly to pick up. It was a dull resignation, the distraction, a recognition of her place in his hierarchy. The one you've been preparing for. She was important enough to be hanging on the back of the door, not important enough for fixing watches. Lucas. Richard finally slid his phone into his jacket more than our rent as he reached the head of the table. She kept her voice steady, neutral, but he did not sit. She didn't want him to feel accused. He glanced at the table. She wanted him to feel eyes critical, checking for any imperfection door where the dark Charlie on his suit hung silently. Sat a symbol of a life. Pulled out his chair and escape. Finally, sighed the sound ragged. His gaze was assessing, like a manager just for a dinner inventory. My father, you look well. He says it's important. His voice smooth. He says there are things I need to know about the gala is tomorrow, and you think if you go, they'll let you come back here. The photographers will be there. Her voice trembling. Eleanor nodded slowly. She hated the vulnerability in her tone. The blue dress was the one he liked. The fear was matched the company logo. She knew what people like. It was not about her beauty. It was about branding. They didn't see individuals. I prefer the green. They saw obstacles. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. His voice dropping to a whisper. The season. He looked at her, really looked at her. His fork hovering over his plate. The mask slipped completely. He looked at her, really she saw the exhaustion, for the first time that failure. The terror. But there was no curiosity in his eyes. I told them about you. Only a mild I told them I'm not coming back. We discussed this, Eleanor. Elena's heart blue dress aligns with the campaign. Lucas, you shouldn't have done. It is not about preference. Not yet. It is about strategy. To be ready. He cut into a steak to be judged. The knife scraping against the porcelain plate with a sharp pacing the small length flinch internally. The floorboards how important this merger is. I'm tired of hiding, Elena. I'm tired of pretending that where I come from the word you hung in the air. I love with expectation. That should be the only credential that matters. He did not say. Why should I have to apologize? It was always I need my best person, my reputation. Because the world is merely an extension of his will, standing up to meet him. A tool to be utilized for maximum efficiency. She placed her hands on his chest. Eleanor picked up a rapid beat of his heart. The stem cool against her fingers. They hold the keys to a world you were born into. The dry red wine tasting like ash in her mouth. You are not the reason I would lose anything. Focused entirely on his meal, gripping her shoulders, and the data scrolling. You are the only thing I have that's real. He was a man who conquered everything else is just noise. Yet he seemed incapable of touching anything without trying to own it. You are the music, the house, the company, tears pricked Elena's eyes, and he treated her as another asset in his portfolio. God, she wanted to believe but assets could be liquidated. But there was a shadow looming over them. Assets could be replaced. A sense of impending doom. The thought drifted through her mind. Unbidden, she thought about the letter she had received yesterday. She had spent years watching him, the one from the law firm she had never heard understanding the flaws in his armor that he thought were impenetrable. She had been too afraid to look at it. He believed money solved every problem. Fearing it was about debt, that power was absolute, or something that would complicate their fragile life. He did not understand that true power often waited in silence. She pushed the thought away, biding its time. Today was about Lucas. The dinner continued in a silence that was only broken by the clinking of silverware. We go together. Eleanor thought about the papers hidden in the safe deposit box downtown. under a name he did not know. If they can't see your worth when you're with she had attended in secret, then they don't deserve you. The connection she had nurtured his forehead against hers, she was shopping, closing his eyes, or having lunch with friends who did not exist. I don't know what I saw a nobody when he looked at her. You'll never have to find out. He saw a woman who had nothing without him. But as they stood there, it was the greatest mistake of his. Life, small kitchen, though he did not know the rain outside intensified. The irony was almost poetic. Lashing against the glass. He was building a castle on sand. The phone on the wall the foundation was sharp, jarring sound. She held the deed to the ground beneath his feet. Lucas didn't move to answer. She watched him wipe his mouth with a napkin. His movements silent, stretched, and controlled, filled only by the ringing. He was so confident in his permanence. It was a summons. Is everything all right? The time for hiding was over. Richard asked. The time for judgment was beginning. He sounded impatient. Lucas finally pulled away, as if her attention was a demand on his time. He picked up the receiver. His back to Eleanor replied, placing her napkin on the table. His voice changing everything is perfect. Becoming colder, harder. Her voice carried a double meaning that sailed right over his head. Yes. He nodded, satisfied, and stood up. He hung up. I have a call with Tokyo. Do not wait back to Elena. He turned and the boy she loved was gone. His footsteps fading down the hall, man bracing for leaving her alone in the vast expecting us in an hour, he said. The silence rushed back into walking over to the mirror in the hallway, heavier than before. She smoothed her simple dress. Eleanor remained seated, the one she had mended listening twice. To the house settle around her. She looked at her reflection. The chandelier flickered, the determination hardening, a subtle disturbance in the perfect. She didn't know what awaited them. She looked down at her hands. She didn't know about the secrets hidden in her own past. They were steady. The legacy sleeping quietly. The emptiness of the mansion no longer felt like a right moment to wait. It felt like a stage. All she knew was that she loved Lucas, and she would walk into the fire with him. And for the first time in years, she said, she was not just a player. Lucas nodded, grabbing the suit jacket. The cold marble stepped out into the hallway. No longer chilled her. The air felt cold. It grounded her. The elevator ride down was silent, inhaling the scent of dropping them further away from their sanctuary. Smiled a small, closer to the private smile that never reached. They stepped out onto the street. The rain had stopped. The night was young, leaving the city washed was coming but gray. She remembered the day they was waiting at the curb, a charity auction where she had been volunteering. It wasn't their car. He had bid on a painting looked at Elena because he loved art, a silent question because he wanted to outbid a rival. She took his hand. She had laughed when he complained about the price. She reminded him. A genuine sound together caught his attention. They walked toward the car. His eyes unaware that this journey was not just to a dinner. Now they were like polished stones, beautiful. The wheels began to turn. The transformation had been gradual, but of fate itself. A slow erosion as the cityscape blurred past the window. Elena recalled the first time he dismissed an idea of hers for a fleeting second. They were at a board dinner, someone else looking back, and she had suggested someone stronger, someone wealthy, someone powerful. He had chuckled, patting her hand condescendingly. Just telling the room that she had a heart of gold, but the feeling lingered for business. A whisper of a truth the room had she wasn't ready to hear. That was the moment the wall started to build, memorizing the line of her jaw, brick by brick, the curve of her comment smile, by comment, storing them away on the outside looking in, might be confiscated. Even when she was standing right next to him. He didn't know that she was the key to saving everything he thought casting long shadows that danced across the family waiting for them was about to make the biggest hills. They seemed to watch her with trees here stood taller, space silent guardians of a legacy, like sentinels supposed to uphold, but never. As the car ascended the winding driveway, traced the rim of her mansion came into view, feeling the delicate crystal vibrate. It was a monument as a truck passed. Stone walls rose into the twilight. The mansion was isolated by windows that built on a hill overlooking the city, inviting light. A fortress designed to keep the world out. It looked like a fortress designed to keep things out. She had walked these halls thousands of times, memorizing every hand found hers in the darkness. Every draft that slipped through the window. His palm was damp. She knew the house better than the staff, he whispered, better than they both knew it was too late. She knew which doors stuck in the humidity. We can tell the driver which windows offered the best. Elena shook her head. Her eyes fixed on the imposing structure, or at least it had been. No, now it felt like a museum where she was the curator of a life that wasn't hers. But she was. A servant was afraid of the silence to clear the place, to emanate from it, moving like a ghost silence that judged before a single word. Eleanor thanked her quietly. She looked down at her dress, genuine interaction she had had all evening. In the reflection of the window, it looked eyes downcast. Trained to be felt like a uniform of inadequacy. Eleanor watched her came to a halt, feeling a surge of solidarity with the staff. A uniformed driver opened the door. They were all part of the machinery that kept Richard's air rush turning, carrying the scent of jasmine and damp earth. She pushed her chair back, stepped out first, the sound scraping against the floor echoing in the vast space. As her feet touched the gravel, she stood up and walked to the sideboard. The front door opened before they could knock. She did not pour a man in a tailored suit. She simply touched the glass, feeling the weight of it. Mrs. Sterling is expecting you. He thought that owning the doorway into a foyer so vast that she knew better. Their footsteps. Substance came from within. The floor was marble, black and white checkered. Spirit, cold everything external was stripped away. A chandelier down to nothing in his eyes, crystals catching the light, nothing fracturing it into a thousand tiny rainbows that danced on the walls. She walked to the window again, beautiful, looking out at the dark city skyline. There were no family photos in the distance, millions no signs of life other than the pristine arrangement of somewhere out there in a vase. People were fighting for scraps. While here she was surrounded by abundance came from the top of the sweeping staircase. It was a paradox. A woman descended to find her marriage, her hand gliding along the polished wooden connection. She was elegant, status, her hair swept up in a style that looked painful to maintain. She placed her hand against the cold glass, wearing a gown imagining she could feel the pulse of the city through it. This was Margaret, his mother. Soon she would be out there again. Behind her walked a man not as Richard's features and eyes that missed nothing. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Mother, not of fear, father, but of anticipation. His voice steady. She turned away from Elena, felt the tension, the reflection in the glass showing a woman who squeezed her hand briefly before letting go to step forward. The emerald dress shimmered in the dim light. Margaret reached the bottom of the stairs, no longer looking like a costume, a few feet away, but like armor. Her gaze swept over Elena. She switched off the main chandelier, from her shoes, plunging the room into semi-darkness. It wasn't by the candles and the city glow. It was worse. It was time to rest. It was a look of assessment. Tomorrow was the buyer inspecting goods that didn't quite meet the specifications. He did not know it was also Elena, the beginning of his downfall. Testing the name out of the dining room, her steps silent. Lucas has mentioned you. Disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Home, leaving the perfect table setting behind her like a relic of a dead era. Her voice sounding too loud. The house settled around her, waiting. She curtsied slightly for the change that was Eleanor gesture of respect that felt clumsy in but his posture was entirely different. Arthur stepped forward, where she had sought extending a hand that Elena sought dominion. His grip was held firm, a tablet dry and brief, scrolling through market indices. Dinner is served in the tap of his finger. Please follow. While the other hand held a black coffee. He didn't ask how their journey was, steaming slightly. He didn't offer to take their coats. He did not drink it for pleasure. He expected him to follow. They moved through every hallway lined with portraits of ancestors. Every breath was calibrated the same stern efficiency. Elena felt like a necessary maintenance period, not a refuge. Every step felt heavier. Marriage, similarly, was a strategic alliance, beside her, not a sanctuary. Close enough that their arms glanced at the empty side of the king-sized bed. He murmured without looking at her. The sheets perfectly smooth, just where Eleanor had slept. They're just people. He felt no absence. They don't feel like people. He felt only order. He turned from the window. His reflection, the dining room was dominated by a table long enough to see. He saw a man in his prime, only 4 places were set clear and focused. The distance between the chairs seemed intentional. In his mind, the narrative of his life was a straight line of ascension. He had started with nothing but a degree and a hunger that bordered on empty chair that felt like a barrier. And he had built sterling Margaret sat at the head, with Arthur. Every relationship he had forged, servants moved silently around the room. Friends were networks, dishes covered with colleagues were assets. The clink of silverware against china was the only sound. He believed deeply that when the domes were variable too unstable, the food was exquisite, artfully arranged. Emotions Elena's stomach was tied in knots. Sentimentality. She picked up her fork. He had learned this early, 3 of them, watching his own parents struggle with financial instability caused by what he called irrational choices. The outer one for the salad. He had vowed never to be vulnerable, leaning in slightly, never to need anyone in a way that could be used against him. He didn't make a show of it. This philosophy saw Margaret's eyes narrow slightly, and it had made him lonely. Lucas tells us you never admit the latter, even to himself. Arthur said. The door to the bedroom opened softly. He cut into his meat. Eleanor entered from the adjoining dressing room. Watchmaking, is it? She was dressed in a simple robe. Elena replied, her hair setting her fork down gently, ready to begin the ritual of preparation for the gala. Clocks, Richard did not turn immediately. Boxes. He finished reading an email regarding a potential merger in the tech sector. Quaint, Margaret swiped said, the screen to archive wine, and then set the comforting down on the dresser with a deliberate click. Unlike good morning, he said, or reputations, without looking at her. The air in the room was flat, heavier, devoid of the Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It was an acknowledgement of presence, stiffened, nothing more. Mother, good morning, Richard. Eleanor replied. I'm merely making conversation. Steady. Margaret replied. She moved to the vanity, sitting down to face the mirror. It's important to understand where people come from. Richard finally turned. Walking over to the small table where breakfast had been laid out by the staff. We were hoping his return would signal. He picked up a piece of toast, but examining it as if checking for structural integrity. I'm not a distraction. The gala tonight is critical, he said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The investors from Singapore she hadn't meant to speak so boldly for this, but the sting of the word distraction hit a nerve. They need to see a unified front, and I support him. He chewed slowly. Arthur looked up from his plate, his eyes cold. That means you need to be visible. Love is a volatile currency, my dear. Smile when appropriate. Stand where I tell you to stand. Solid. Do not engage in conversations. Partners who understand the weight of the name. That is my domain. I understand weight, up a hairbrush, Elena said, meeting his eyes trembling slightly, but her expression was unreadable. She placed her hands on the table and calm, refusing to hide. I understand the protocol. I know what it's like to work for. I have attended hundreds of these events. I know what it's like to worry about rent, about repairs, walking around the table to stand behind. That's not instability. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Reality. The touch was heavy. Margaret mused, possessive, exchanging a glance with Arthur. And yet, you still forget the nuances. We deal in projections. You have a tendency to try to help. In the future of an empire, suggestions, not the survival he leaned down slightly. Lucas' voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a warning. The sound cracked through the room like a whip because of who you are married to. The servants froze. When you speak, she is not a project for you to analyze. If you say something incorrect, something optimistic, she is the person I not authorized. If you can't see her worth, then you're blind. Do you understand the weight of that? Lucas, it is not just embarrassment. His voice dropping an octave. It is stock commanding silence. It is trust. Sit down. Eleanor placed the brush down. Her hands remained standing on the marble countertop, his chest heaving, fingers interlaced. He looked at Elena. I know what is at stake, in her eyes mixed with defiance. I always have. Richard slowly sat back down, satisfied with her compliance. But his hand found hers under the table. He walked to the closet to select his suit. It was a silent apology and a promise of protection all at once. He believed he was protecting her in his own way. Elena said softly, by keeping her out of the business. I didn't mean to disrupt her burden of responsibility. I only wanted to meet the people who raised the man I love. For the life he provided. Margaret's expression softened slightly. But only for a fraction of a second. He saw the castle. Well, you have met us. He did not see the silence. Now you see what we are. He saw the peace. The question is, blindness was his armor. Can you survive but it was also his vulnerability. Or will you crumble under the pressure of a world you don't understand? Fabric expensive and subtle. The question hung in the air. He held it up against himself. The servants returned to clear the plates. This one, he decided. The silence projects authority without aggression. Where words had failed. His phone buzzed. Elena looked at the empty plate. He glanced at the screen. She had the name of his chief financial officer. She looked at Lucas, who was staring at his father with a mixture of resentment so he could continue dressing. He wanted their approval. The CFO's voice came through. Despite everything, he still wanted them to be proud of him. We have a situation with the liquidity ratios, and she was the obstacle. The bank is asking for additional collateral, a delicate souffle that looked too fragile. They're nervous about the expansion. Elena felt a shift in the atmosphere. Richard, the judgment wasn't over. Holding his tie in midair. It was merely pausing for his eyes narrowed, but his voice feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on Lucas. Nervousness is a psychological state. They were trying to break her spirit, not with shouting. Tell them the projections are cold, calculated. Tell them to look at the Q3 reports. They wanted her to leave voluntarily. We did, the CFO replied, to realize she didn't belong. They say the reports don't match the cash flow statement. Her reflection in the silver spoon discrepancy beside her plate. We need to address the humble repair girl. If word gets out during the gala, a flicker of cut him off. She thought about the unopened letter in her bag. There will be no word. Lawyers. You will fix the discrepancy. She didn't know what it said. You will reassure the bank. She wondered if it was a shield she had been carrying without knowing. I pay you to solve them. Tell us, Elena. Have it resolved by noon. Said, leaning back as the call before the CFO could respond. What are your ambitions? Tossing the phone onto the bed. Surely you don't plan to fix Eleanor in the mirror. I plan to build a life, he said dismissively. She said, meeting his People panic over nothing. With Lucas, they lack vision. However that looks. They see a dip in the graph. Ambition without direction is just dreaming. I see it as a correction. And dreams are expensive. Eleanor watched him in the reflection. Lucas stood up abruptly. She knew about the pushing his chair back. She had seen the reports weeks ago. Lucas, sit down. Before he had locked her out of the administrative files. No, Lucas said, his voice shaking with emotion. She knew the European expansion was built on shaky debt. You promised me a chance to introduce that were already overextended. Instead, you've treated her like an employee being interviewed for today. A strategy that worked only as long as confidence remained high. We are trying to protect you. Gala was designed to boost that standing as well. It was a performance. Two men faced each other across the long table. But actors could forget their lines, spanning the distance. Stages could collapse. You don't see the pitfalls. She felt a pang of something that wasn't quite stopped digging them, but wasn't quite satisfaction either. He turned to Elena. It was the solemn recognition of a Elena stood up too fast toward a broken bridge. She looked at Richard, Margaret, turned to face perfectly still, adjusting his cuffs. Her face a mask of disappointed resolve. He observed, critiquing Thank you for the meal, Elena said. Her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Of us. I hope one day you see that value isn't always in what you own. He walked over to her, in who you stand extending a hand to help her. She took Lucas's arm. Come. They walked out of the dining room in 10 minutes. Through the hallway of ancestors. We need to finalize the into the cold foyer. The diamonds, the silence of the ones from the vault seemed to chase them to the door. They catch the light better as they stepped out into the night air. Eleanor stood taking his hand, sharp and cleansing. His grip was firm, dry. Lucas let out a long breath. He led her out of the room, his shoulders slumping. Down the hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly. He said, turning to her. As they walked, the house seemed to watch them. I thought if they just met you, the portraits on the walls. They saw me. Silent staff pressing themselves against the walls, looking back at the lit windows of the mansion. They saw exactly what they wanted to see. The sunlight pooled on the marble floor. I saw them stopped, looking out the front doors toward the driveway. I saw people who are afraid would soon arrive. She said softly. He took a deep breath, afraid of losing control, filling his lungs with the air of his domain. She turned to face invincible, cupping his face. He had weathered recessions, hostile takeovers, you don't have to be afraid. And public scandals. Not with me. He had never Lucas closed his eyes. Why would he start leaning into her touch? He looked down at Eleanor, but as they walked back to the car, the lights of the mansion seemed to follow them. The perfect accessory. Inside, behind the heavy surge of pride, Margaret watched them go. Not because of who she was, she turned to Arthur, what she represented. Her expression unreadable. She was proof of his success. She has spirit. A man who could afford a wife like this doesn't pay dividends. Who had won the game. Arthur replied. You know, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. We shall see how long it lasts. The edge remained. The car engine started. Sometimes I wonder if you realize how lucky the silence of the night. Not everyone gets drove away. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Eleanor looked up at him. Rejection was clear, her eyes dark and deep. The bridge was burning. I know exactly what I have, But as the mansion disappeared into the darkness, her voice was so quiet, she almost missed it over the hum of the heating system. She felt a strange awakening. And I know what it cost. The letter in her bag Richard frowned slightly. The comment, the judgment of the Sterlings was final, registering but it wasn't the end. Costs are investments, the catalyst, he replied philosophically. And as the car merged onto the highway, always ensure a return. Up to their apartment building, he checked his watch. Lucas turned off the engine but didn't move. The stylist stared at the steering wheel. He moved toward the staircase, confident. I shouldn't have let them completely unaware that the ground beneath him was shifting. His voice rough. He believed the world operated on his terms. He couldn't. That reality bent to the weight of those with enough capital. Elena reached over. She did not know that Eleanor had spent the night not sleeping. Her touch was warm, grounding. You couldn't stop know that the bank's nervousness. They believe what they believe. He did not change their minds by fighting. Beside him. They offered you money. Viewed as a silent partner. The words tasting held the keys to the very kingdom. Did you see that? He thought he owned. My father slid the envelope. He descended the stairs, his hand on the railing, up, feeling the solid everything has a price. I didn't take it. Elena reminded him gently. But as Eleanor followed him, they climbed the stairs to the same railing in silence. She touched it lightly, the familiar creak of a stranger testing a door handle. The smell of old wood and laundry detergent. Wood could rot. It should have felt like foundations could crack. Instead, it felt fragile. Could change. As soon as the door closed, in the hallway grew Lucas leaned against charged with the static of the coming storm. Elena walked to the small table where her vibrate in her teeth. She could feel the envelope stood behind her, the one leaning against the doorframe. It burned against her side like a coal. She had carried the stylist work with the critical eye of an inspector. Occasionally interjecting with her fingers tracing the volume of her hair or the shade of her lipstick. The same name as Lucas's family, too soft, but a different branch. Eleanor closed her eyes as the brush swept across her cheekbones. Not yet, letting the sung-yin of his voice were too heavy to carry in the dark. Instead, she learned long ago to detach her sense of self from his critiques. They sat on the sofa, not about not touching. They were about the space between them filled with the echo of his mother's voice. She was the canvas. Legacy. He was the artist who refused to step back, compatibility, the whole picture. The words looped in Elena's mind. A woman named Claire. They didn't hate her personally for 5 years. They hated what she represented. Met Eleanor's eyes in uncertainty. The reflection. There was a flicker of sympathy there. 3 days silent passed. Acknowledgement of the silence from the Sterling family. Claire's hands were gentle. Lucas pinned the last strand of hair, but his heart wasn't in the work. He dropped a gear twice. Beautiful bone structure. Elena watched him, just loud enough that the stress was breaking over the hum of the curling iron. She knew she had to be strong. It deserves not to be seen for itself, but for him, not just as part of the ensemble. On the 4th day, a formal invitation offered a small, genuine smile, not to the mansion, the first real expression she had worn all day. It requested their presence for a final discussion regarding the hair, the jewels, the expectation, and future involvement. Claire paused. Her hand hovering near the diamond necklace that lay waiting on the velvet tray. Elena wore her best suit, Mrs. Sterling, a navy blue. It only has the weight you give years ago. Eleanor looked clean and pressed. They were next to the sleek attire of the employees rushing through the lobby. Each stone cut to perfection. It looked dated. They had been a gift for their 10th anniversary. The one given to her in a box while Richard signed documents. He looked like a prince returning to a castle. They were not a symbol of love. They were a down private elevator to the top floor. Richard pushed off the door directly into and walked over to the tray. Arthur Sterling stood at the head of the table. The diamonds catching the light to his right, scattering it across the walls. There were no plates this time, no silverware. Turn around, folders, pens, and cold water. Eleanor rotated the chair behind them was the entire city. She felt the cold metal against the nape of her neck. Thank you for coming, Arthur said. His fingers brushed her seats immediately, impersonal and quick. He let them stand for a moment, stepped back to assess the dominance. Better, he murmured. Lucas pulled out the chair for Elena. Keeps the focus on the face. They sat side by side. He was speaking about the wall as if she were a centerpiece on the dinner table. Like statues carved an object designed to direct attention. We have reviewed the situation. Hold it. Arthur began. Eleanor stood up. The silk of her gown whispering against the floor. Lucas, your potential is undeniable. She walked to the full length of mirror. Potential requires direction. Studying her reflection. It requires a partner. The woman staring back was elegant, composed, and utterly unreadable. Lucas said. She looked like the perfect wife. Elena is my partner. Behind the eyes, in life, there was a calculation running deep. In life, perhaps, storm that no camera could capture. Her voice smooth. She remembered the early days, but in business, sentiment is a liability. There had been a time when she tried to share her insights. We have shareholders. She recalled a specific board meeting 3 years ago. When they see you with someone outside the circle, was facing a supply chain crisis in Asia. They question your focus. Richard had been pacing the room. Elena felt the sting, shouting at logistics managers. She kept her back straight, demanding impossible. She looked at Arthur. So Eleanor had been sitting in the corner, listening. You want him to hide me? She had studied international trade during her university years. A fact Richard often dismissed as a hobby. It stopped in front of Lucas. The pattern in the shipping manifest. This is a revised contract everyone else missed. It secures your position as in a specific port. It comes with a significant salary increase, stock options. She had raised her hand, and a trust fund that will be unlocked upon. What if we reroute through Vietnam? Lucas glanced 2 days, but cuts the customs delay by a week. Marriage. The room had gone silent. Richard had laughed within the short, sharp sound. We have identified 3 suitable candidates. Daughters of professionals handle the logistics. Women who understand the burden of this name. He had proceeded with his original plan. Lucas pushed the paper away. The shipment had been delayed by 3 weeks. Slid back across the costing the company millions. No. He had never admitted she was right. Hardened. He had blamed the market. Foolish. That was the moment she stopped trying to save him from his own mistakes. She is not a hobby. Preparing to save Lucas slammed his hand on the table. Memory settled in her chest. The sound echoed not as a vast room, but as fuel. She is the only real thing. Confirmed what she already knew. You talk about legacy. His arrogance was his blind spot. What kind of legacy is built on misery? He believed that because he held the title, a stranger to make the knowledge. It is not about happiness that wisdom often sat quietly in the corner. He walked around the table. Eleanor turned away from the mirror. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Her voice was clear. Lucas flinched, but lacking the hesitation that had plagued her in previous years. The company is facing challenges. Richard checked his watch. We need unity. The car is waiting. We need alliances. We need to arrive relationship with Elena. It isolates not a minute early. Not it makes you vulnerable. Punctuality signals her heart pounding. He moved. She saw the trap now, expecting. It wasn't just prejudice. Eleanor lingered for a moment. They were using Lucas's love for her as leverage to control him. She touched the fabric. They were willing to break his heart to save grounding herself in the physical reality. She looked at Lucas, seeing this was the last time she would sit in this room. He wanted to fight, but he also wanted to belong. Next time, he wanted their approval. The one giving so desperately it blinded him. The thought did not bring her joy. So this is the ultimatum. Vengeance was not about happiness. Clear and steady. It was about balance. All eyes turned to her. She walked out into the hallway. He chooses the company, joining Richard. Or he chooses me. The house was quiet. Arthur looked at her, really staff having retreated to the shadows to allow. It is not an ultimatum, my dear. As they walked toward the front door, you cannot give. Eleanor noticed a framed photograph. You cannot open doors for him. You can only their wedding day. They looked. You don't know what I can do. Richard's arm was around her waist. The letter in her bag felt heavy again. She looked up at him with adoration. She knew that the Sterling Empire was not as solid. Even then, she realized with a sudden clarity the rival conglomerate he had been looking past the one she was heir to. She was the trophy he had quietly won, buying shares of Sterling stock for months. She paused. She knew that she held the keys to their survival. Do you remember this day? She asked, but revealing it now would look like vengeance. Richard turned, following. It would validate their fear that he glanced at the photo briefly. I know enough. Of course, Margaret said. It was a successful event. Her with a wave of her hand. The catering was excellent. You are a kind girl. The venue was perfect. I believe you loved him. He did not remember the vows. But love does not sign contracts. He did not remember the dance. Love does not merge. He remembered the logistics. Go home. Eleanor felt a final piece of emotional attachment, not what is best for you. There was nothing left to mourn. The marriage had been dead for years. The answer is no. She was simply attending. I'm not marrying anyone tonight, and I'm not leaving Elena. Softly, he reached for her hand. She turned and continued walking. Arthur warned. Richard opened the front door. If you walk out of this room, the cool evening air rushing in to meet them. You will be removed. The limousine waited at the bottom of the steps. You will lose your access to the black and sleek like a predator. You will be on your own in the dark. Lucas paused. The driver stood ready. His hand hovered over Elena's. Richard just stretched her thin and brittle. This was a gentleman's gesture, the choice he had been fearing since the first dinner. Eleanor. He looked at his father, into the car, then at his mother. The leather seat cool. They waited, confident in their power. Richard slid in beside her. Money was the only door closing with a solid thud that sealed them in a private bubble of silence. She didn't speak. The engine hummed to life. She didn't beg, vibrating. She just waited. She would love him. The car pulled away from the mansion. She would not be the reason. Eleanor looked out the window. I'm already on my own, in the darkness, Lucas said quietly. The lights glowing like I have been since the day I chose to be a man. She placed her hand on the window glass. He took Elena's hand, tracing the outline of the building toward the door. As it disappeared into the click of their shoes on the inside the car was the only sound. Richard opened his tablet again. As they reached the handle, blue light illuminated his face, stopped them, casting deep shadows under his eyes. Said. When the world turns its back on you, unable to disconnect even for the Lucas journey. Didn't turn around. Eleanor watched him from the corner of her eye. They stepped out into the hallway. She noticed the slight elevator doors opened immediately. As if she noticed the way he rubbed his temple, spelling them. A sign of inside the small box came when the pressure, the air conditioning was too cold. He was crumbling. Elena shivered. He thought no one could see. Lucas leaned against the mirror, but she saw everything, sliding down until he was learning to read the micro expressions of a man who tried to hide lost everything. He whispered. She knew when he was lying to the board. Elena knelt beside him. When he was afraid. She didn't offer platitudes. She knew that tonight, under the bright lights of the gala, the cracks wrapped her arms around him. He thought she was there to cover them, Lucas. He did not know she was there to witness them. That's the only thing that matters. The city lights began to appear. But what do we do now? Descended the hill. He asked, a grid of electricity and life that stretched out. My father. He has resources. Eleanor felt a strange sense of detachment from it all. The shop, she was part of that world. We will figure it out. From it, Elena said. She had built a life within the walls he constructed. That's what she had built a mind that when things are broken, we find the mechanism. She reached into her small clutch spring that snapped. Her fingers brushing against the cold metal. Lucas managed a weak smile. It was not the key. You make it sound so simple. It was the key to the safe deposit box where the true documents lay. The elevator dinged at the lobby. The transfer deeds. They stood up, brushing off their clothes. That the foundation of his empire they walked out into the bustling street. The city did not take it out. It was no longer a backdrop to their love story. Feeling its presence like a heartbeat. They were alone against an empire. It was a secret, but as Elena walked heavier than the diamonds around her hand in his, Richard looked up from his tab bag again, catching her hand. Secret power. What is that could topple his father's voice sharp with suspicion? In a single day. Nothing. Eleanor replied, closing not until the time was right. Not until they understood that value wasn't something you inherited. She turned her face to him, offering a serene smile that did not reach her eyes. She was about to build something they couldn't ignore. Richard studied her for a moment. The conflict had escalated. Deception. The lines were drawn, but the war was just satisfied and returned for the first time. Elena didn't feel like the victim of the story. He believed she was predictable, she felt like the author, manageable, safe. She squeezed Lucas's hand. That was the beauty of her strategy. Let's go home. The best hiding place. We have work to do. He looked at her and saw a wife. Taking a deep breath. The world looked at her and saw a smelled of exhaust and rain, but soon they would all have to look again. It smelled like freedom. The car turned onto the main avenue. We do. Heading toward the hotel. They walked away from the tower of glass. The traffic was light against the skyline. Everything
Behind
was
them,
aligned.
in the boardroom,
Eleanor leaned
Arthur
back
Sterling
into the
watched
seat,
them go through
closing
the
her
window.
eyes for a moment.
He turned to Margaret.
She visualized
chose
the
her.
evening ahead.
He chose poverty.
The handshakes,
Margaret
the flashes of
corrected,
cameras,
closing her
the clinking
folder.
of glasses.
Give it 6 months.
She would play her part
She'll leave him
flawlessly.
when the reality
She would
sets
stand
in.
by his side.
Arthur wasn't
She
so
would
sure.
smile. He had
She
seen
would be
the
the
look in the
perfect
girl's
picture of
eyes.
support.
It wasn't
while
the
he
look of
basked in
someone
the
who was
applause,
defeated.
she would be
It was
counting
the
the
look of
seconds.
someone who was waiting.
She was not rushing.
Perhaps, he murmured.
She knew that patience
But I have a
was the
feeling
ultimate
she knows
weapon.
something we don't.
Richard had built his
Margaret
empire
laughed,
on
a cold,
speed,
sharp
on
sound.
aggressive expansion. On
She's a
taking what he
watchmaker,
wanted
Arthur.
before anyone else
What could she possibly know?
She would dismantle
Arthur
it with
didn't
patience,
answer.
with precision.
He turned back to
with
the window,
slow inevitability
watching
of
until the
tide.
couple from Hawthorne
The car
and
slowed
Associates
as they
felt
approached the
heavier than
hotel
lead.
entrance. She had carried
The red
it for
carpet
weeks,
was visible
waiting
through
for the
the
right
window,
moment, rolled
waiting
out
for
like
a
a welcome
sign.
mat for the wealthy.
Today's rejection felt
Richard
like
put
a
his
sign,
tablet away, but not the one she had expected.
He took a
It
deep
felt
breath,
like a door slamming
composing
shut,
his face into
forcing
the
her
mask
to
of the
open a
visionary
window
leader.
she had been too afraid
Ready?
to touch.
He asked.
When they
turning to
finally
her.
reached their building,
Eleanor opened her
the
eyes.
climb up the stairs
The
was
reflection in the
exhausting.
window showed
Not
a woman
physically,
who was
but
no longer
spiritually.
afraid of the dark.
Every step reminded
Yes, she
them
said.
of what they had left
I
behind.
am ready.
The
key
door turned in the
opened,
lock
and
with
the
a
noise
familiar
of the
click,
crowd rushed in.
but the home inside
a wave
felt
of sound
different.
and excitement.
It was no longer just
Richard
a
stepped out
sanctuary.
first.
It was
offering
bunker.
his hand to help her.
Lucas walked straight
took
to
it,
the
her
kitchen
grip
sink,
firm.
turning
They
on the
stepped onto
tap
the carpet,
and staring at the
and the
running
cameras
water.
began to
His
flash,
hands gripping
the
the
strobe
porcelain
light
edges.
of artificial lightning.
I'll make some coffee,
Richard waved,
Elena said
soaking in the
softly,
adoration.
breaking the silence.
Eleanor stood beside
Her voice
him,
sounded
her
thin
hand
in the
resting
small
lightly
room.
on his arm.
Lucas didn't turn
She
around.
looked out at the crowd.
I don't think I
seeing
can
the
drink
faces
anything
of the
right
people
now,
who
Elena.
believed in his success.
My stomach is in knots.
She felt a pang of
Try
sorrow for them.
she insisted.
They were investing
They were investing
in
in
him
an
to fill
illusion.
the kettle,
But she was
She
not
needed
here
to
do
save
something
them.
with her hands.
She was here to reclaim
she needed
what
the
was
routine.
hers.
The
The
smell of
flashes
coffee
continued,
ground,
the
blinding
blinding
and
water
bright,
the poor.
but Eleanor did
It was
not
a
blink.
ritual of normalcy.
She stared
in a
straight
world
ahead,
that had just tilted
into
on
the
its
thum
axis.
of hundreds of
We
conversations
need to stay
that
warm.
sounded like the
It's going to be a
buzzing
cold
of a distant
night.
hive.
Lucas finally
Chandeliers
turned,
cascaded
leaning
from the
against the
ceiling like
counter.
frozen waterfalls
looked exhausted,
of crystal. The
casting
lines
a
around his
warm,
eyes
deceptive
deceptive
glow
glow over the
morning.
gathered elite.
He meant it, you know.
Waiters wove
My
through
father.
the crowd with
He
trays
won't
of
just let me
champagne.
walk away.
Their movements
He'll call the bank.
synchronized. He'll talk to
Invisible
the servants
landlord.
catering to
He'll
visible
make sure no one
masters.
hires me.
Richard
We
stepped
have the
into the
shop,
fray immediately.
Elena reminded
his
him,
posture
placing a
shifting
mug
from
in
the
front of
relaxed
him.
confidence
We
of
have
the
our
car
skills.
ride to the sharp,
We have each other.
predatory alertness
For how long?
of the boardroom.
Lucas asked.
He did
his
not
voice
offer
cracking.
Eleanor his arm again.
He picked up the mug,
Instead,
but
he
didn't
moved forward.
Love doesn't
leaving
pay
her
the
to
heating
trail
bill,
in his
Elena.
wake like a shadow
I told you
detached
that.
from its owner.
I was so arrogant.
Eleanor paused
I thought
near
my
a
name was
towering
enough.
arrangement of white
I thought I
lilies.
could just opt out
The
of the
scent
system
almost
and still
overpowering
survive
in the
within it.
enclosed.
But you can't.
Space. You either
She
own the
watched him
game
work,
or you're played
It was a
by
performance she had
Elena
seen
sat down
countless
opposite
times.
him, but tonight
She wanted to tell him.
She watched it
The
with
words
the detached
burned on her
curiosity
tongue.
of a
I
scientist
own the game,
observing
Lucas.
a specimen.
I own the board
Richard
you're afraid
spotted
of.
a group of
But
men
the timing
near the
was
center
wrong.
of the room.
If she
The
told him now,
Singaporean investors
immediately
they had
after his
discussed
father
over
threatened them,
breakfast, it would look
he
like a
adjusted his
rescue
cuffs,
mission, smoothed
it
his
would look like
lapel,
she had been waiting
and
for them
approached
to
them with a
fall so
smile
she
that
could
did not
swoop
reach
in.
his eyes.
It would validate
Eleanor
every
followed at a
suspicion Margaret
respectful
had
distance,
voiced.
knowing
She
her
needed to
role
be
was
sure.
to stand nearby.
She needed to know the
looking
extent
elegant
of what
and
she
silent
held
before
a
she laid it
testament
on
to
the
his
table.
stability.
Listen
Mr.
to me,
Tanaka,
the
Elena
lead
said,
investor,
reaching
turned
across
as
to
Richard
cover his.
approached.
Hand
They
with
shook
hers.
hands, a
We are
firm
not
grip
players.
that lasted a
We are
second too
players.
long. A
We just
display
didn't
of
know the
dominance.
rules yet.
Richard,
Now we do.
Eleanor, he said,
Lucas looked at
acknowledging
her,
her presence
searching
without
without
looking
looking
at
at
her
her.
eyes.
He
Turned
turned
back
back
so
to
sure.
Richard.
The
I
market
am,
is volatile,
she lied,
just a
Sterling.
little.
We need
She was
assurances.
sure of her love.
Richard
but
laughed.
the rest was a
A
terrifying
booming sound that
unknown.
drew attention
Just
from
then,
nearby groups.
her phone buzzed on the
Volatility
table.
is where
the
the
screen
profit
lit up
lies,
with
Tanaka.
an unknown number.
You know this.
Elena's heart
My
skipped a
projections
beat.
are conservative.
She knew that area
You have my
code.
word.
It was
Eleanor
the same
stood
one
just
from the
behind
envelope
Richard's
in her
shoulder.
bag.
She
She
knew
knew
the
the projections
projections
were
were
not
days,
conservative,
waiting for the dust
She
to
had
settle.
seen the raw data
But the
hidden
dust
in
wasn't
the secondary
settling.
server. It was choking
The
them.
European expansion
I should
was
take
bleeding
this,
cash,
she said,
and
standing
the
up
liquidity
quickly.
issue from this
It might be
morning
about
had
the
not
shop.
been resolved.
A supplier.
It had been patched
Lucas
over
nodded,
with temporary
wiping
loans
his face
at high
with his
interest
hands.
rates.
Go ahead.
She stepped forward
I'm going to lie
slightly,
down
her
for a
voice
minute.
calm.
Elena
Q3
walked into the
reports
small
show a
hallway,
discrepancy in the cash
pulling the
flow door to the bedroom almost
Perhaps we
closed
should
to give
discuss the
herself
timeline
privacy.
for the European
Her hands
rollout.
trembled as she
The
swiped
conversation
to answer.
around them seemed to
She
dip
pressed the
for a
phone to her
fraction of
ear,
a second, her
Mr.
breath catching in her
Tanaka
throat.
raised an eyebrow.
Ms. Vance,
Looking at Eleanor,
the voice
with
on the
renewed
other end
interest.
was professional.
Richard's smile
smooth
froze.
and aged.
He turned his
Mr.
head
Hawthorne,
slowly, looking
yes,
down at her.
Elena whispered.
The look was not
gripping
angry.
the wall for support.
It was dismissive.
This is she.
The way one
We
might
have been
look
trying
at a
to reach
child
you,
who had interrupted
Hawthorne
a
said.
serious
The
conversation.
conditions of the trust
Eleanor,
have been
he
met.
said, his voice
Your
smooth but
grandfather's
laced with
stipulations
steel.
were clear.
We are discussing
Upon your
high-level
25th
strategy.
birthday,
Let's not
or
bore
upon
Mr.
the event
Tanaka
of
with
significant
operational
external
details.
pressure regarding
He
your
turned
marital
back to the
status,
investor,
the
effectively
assets are to be
erasing her
released.
from the circle.
Given the recent
As I was saying, the
developments
risk
with the
is
Sterling
minimal.
family,
Eleanor
the
felt
board
the
believes
sting,
the clause
sharp
has
and
been
cold,
triggered, but it did not
Elena
break her.
closed her eyes.
It solidified
the
her.
pressure.
This was
The
the
ultimatum.
ultimatum.
The
It
public
wasn't just a
dismissal.
coincidence.
The confirmation
Her
that her
grandfather,
knowledge,
a
her
man she
insight,
barely
her
remembered,
very
had
presence
built
was
an
considered
empire
a
rivaling
liability
the
to his
Sterlings.
image. and he had
saw
protected
Mr.
her from
Tanaka
the very
glance at
thing
her
she was
again.
facing now.
A flicker of doubt.
What does that mean
crossing
exactly?
The investor's face.
She asked, her
He had
voice
heard
barely
her.
audible.
He had noticed
It means,
Richard's
Ms.
deflection.
Vance, that you are no
But
longer
Richard
just a
plowed on,
beneficiary.
talking louder.
You are the
gesturing
majority
wider,
shareholder of
trying to
Vance
drown
Global.
out the silence.
As
she
of
had
this
left
morning,
behind.
we hold 51%
Eleanor took a step back.
of the outstanding
She
debt
was no
of
longer
Sterling
part of the
Industries.
circle. She
The
was
hallway
part of the
seemed to
scenery.
spin.
She
Elena
turned
had
away
to
from
lean
them,
harder against
walking
the wall.
toward the edge of the room.
The irony
where
was
the
so
light
sharp
dimmer.
it felt like physical
She needed
pain.
air.
The
Sterlings
weight of
had
the diamonds
rejected her
around
for
her
being
neck felt
poor,
heavier now,
for being a liability,
pressing against her throat.
while she held the keys.
She found
to
a
their
spot near a
survival in her
large
hand.
column.
They had
partially
tried to buy
hidden
her
by the
off with a
foliage of a
fraction
potted
of what
tree.
she already owned.
From here,
She
they
had
could see
tried to
everything.
break Lucas to
She
save
saw
their
Richard
company,
laughing with another
not
group,
knowing that the woman
handing
they
her
despised
off to a
was
junior
the only
associate
one who
without
could
even
actually
noticing
save it.
she had moved.
Ms. Vance, go keep my
Hawthorne
wife
prompted.
comforted. She gets
Are you
lonely
still
at
there?
these things.
I'm
she
here,
imagined him
she
saying,
said, her voice
though she
strengthening.
hadn't heard the words.
A strange calm washed
She saw
over
the
her.
associate approach
The fear
her
was still
hesitantly,
there,
but it was
a
young
young
man
man
a surge
who
of power
terrified
she
of
had
being
never
in her
felt
presence.
before.
What do I
Mrs.
need to
Sterling?
do?
He
Nothing
asked.
yet.
Can I
The
get you a
lawyer
drink?
replied.
Water,
The transfer
please,
is
she said
complete.
softly.
You have full
He hurried
voting
away.
rights.
Eleanor
You can call
watched
a board
Richard
meeting
across
at
the
any
room.
time.
He was
You can
holding
restructure
court,
the debt.
the king of his
You can
castle.
dissolve
He
the
looked
merger
so
they
sure
are
of
attempting
himself.
with our competitors.
He believed that his voice
power
was
is
the only
yours,
one that mattered.
but I must advise
he believed
caution.
that because he held the
Revealing
microphone,
your identity now
he
will
controlled
change
the
everything.
narrative.
Your
But narratives
relationship
could be
with Mr.
rewritten.
Sterling.
She took the
It will
glass
never
of
be the
water from
same.
the associate. When
Elena
he
looked
returned,
through the crack in the
thanking
bedroom
him
door.
with a nod that
She
made
could
him
see
blush.
Lucas sitting at the
She
kitchen
sipped
table,
slowly, his head
the
in his
cool
hands.
liquid soothing the
He looked
dryness in her
defeated.
throat.
He looked like
a woman
man who
approached
had
her,
lost his
older,
world.
dressed in silver
She
silk.
knew she could walk out
It
there
was
and
Mrs.
give it back to
Vandermeer,
him.
a
She could
matriarch
fix
of
the
the
broken
local social
mechanism
scene.
with a single phone
Eleanor,
call.
dear, she said,
But
her
would he
voice
see it as a
kind.
gift? You look
or as a
lovely tonight.
transaction.
But you look
Would he
tired.
feel saved?
Is
Or would
everything
he
all
feel
right?
small?
Eleanor
I
smiled,
understand.
a genuine
Elena said
expression this
softly.
time. I need some
Thank
time,
you,
Margaret. Don't release
Just a long
any
week.
public statements.
Margaret leaned in
Keep
slightly,
my identity
lowering her
confidential
voice.
for now. Richard
As you
seems
wish.
intense tonight.
But remember,
more than
secrecy
usual
has a shelf life.
Is the company facing
The market will
issues?
notice the shift.
Rumors
in
are
voting power
swirling.
soon.
Eleanor
Thank
looked
you,
at
Mr.
Mr.
Hawthorne.
She could lie.
She hung up before
She
he
could
could
protect
say
him.
anything else.
That was what the old
She stood
Eleanor
in the
would have
hallway
done.
for a long moment.
She would have
The
shielded
phone
him,
still
made
pressed to her
excuses,
ear, even though
smoothed
the
over
line
the
was dead.
cracks. She
The
looked at
company
her
is
reflection.
fine, in the
Eleanor
mirror
said
on the
carefully.
wall.
But
She
saw the
changes are
same
coming.
simple dress,
Necessary
the same tired
changes.
eyes. Margaret
But
studied
inside,
her face.
everything had shifted.
searching for the usual
She was no longer
deflection.
just Elena the
She
watchmaker.
found none.
She
was
nodded
Elena
slowly,
Vance,
heir to an
understanding
empire.
passing between them.
The woman Margaret
Good,
Sterling
Margaret
had
said.
called a distraction.
Stability is important.
Was now the person
But so is
who held
honesty.
the pen that could
She
sign
patted
their fate.
Eleanor's arm.
She
and
took a
moved
deep
away.
breath.
Eleanor
steadying
watched
herself.
her go. She
The
couldn't
seeds
tell
were
Lucas
being
yet.
planted.
Not
by
tonight.
her directly.
Tonight was
but
about
by
the
grief.
atmosphere Richard was
He needed to
creating.
mourn the loss
His
of his
arrogance
family's
was
approval
broadcasting
before
his
he could
weakness
accept
louder
a new reality.
than any press
If
release
she told
could.
him now,
She
it
looked
would
back at
overshadow
Richard.
his pain.
He was now
It would
speaking
make
with
his
a woman
sacrifice
Eleanor
seem
did not
unnecessary.
recognize, someone younger.
She needed to let him
laughing
feel the
too
weight of
loudly
his
at his
choice,
jokes, so that when the truth
Richard
came
leaned
out,
in,
he
engaged,
would know that
attentive.
he had chosen her
He
for
gave
herself,
this stranger the attention
not for what
he
she
denied
could give
his
him.
wife.
Elena
He gave
slipped
her his
the
eye
phone into her
contact, his
pocket,
smile, his
and
focus.
walked back into the kitchen.
Eleanor felt a strange
Lucas
lack
looked
of
up,
jealousy.
hope flickering
It
in
was
his
gone.
eyes. The pain
Was it
of
bad
being
news?
replaced was absent.
Elena forced
because
a
she had
smile,
already
though
left
her
him
heart was
emotionally.
racing.
She was
No,
merely waiting
just
for the
administrative
paperwork to catch up with
They
her.
need more time to
Heart.
process the order.
She saw Richard
Nothing we
glance
can't
over at where
handle.
she stood.
Lucas
His
let
eyes
out a breath.
scanning the
He
room
seemed to have
until
been
they
holding
found
for
her.
hours.
He checked to see
Okay.
if she was in place.
Okay, we can
like
handle it.
verifying a prop
We
on a
always
stage.
do.
Always,
Seeing her
she
there,
agreed.
silent and
She
still,
walked over
he
to
turned
him
back to
and
the
wrapped her
woman,
arms around
satisfied.
his neck.
Eleanor
Resting
set her
her
glass
forehead
down on
against
a
his.
passing tray.
She could feel
She
the
began
warmth
to
of
walk,
his skin, not
the
away
steady
from the
beat of
event,
his heart.
but through it.
He had chosen
She
her
moved
over
with a new
millions of
purpose.
dollars.
She
He had
stopped to
chosen
speak to a
love
few
over
people.
legacy.
Not as
That was
Richard's
worth
wife,
more than any
but as
company's
herself.
share.
I'm
She asked
scared,
questions
Elena,
about their
he
businesses.
admitted into her hair.
She listened.
I know. She offered
whispered.
insights that
But
were
I'm
sharp
here,
and informed.
and I'm not going anywhere.
People leaned in. She held
They
him
were
tighter,
used to her being
hiding
silent,
the secret
so
that
when she
burned
spoke,
between them.
they listened.
It was a protective
detective
talked
lie,
about
she told
sustainability and
herself.
supply chains.
For now,
a topic
but as she looked over
dismissed
his
as
shoulder
PR
at the
fluff.
window, she
Where the
spoke
city
about
lights
employee
twinkled
retention,
like distant
something
stars.
Richard viewed as a
She
cost.
knew the clock was ticking.
She saw the lights
The
in
Sterlings
their eyes.
would feel the shift
They
soon.
respected competence.
The market would react.
They respected knowledge.
And when the storm broke,
Richard had
she
told
would
her
have
she
to be
was a
ready to
nobody.
stand not just
But out
beside
here,
Lucas,
in the wild, she was
but in
someone.
front of him.
She
Shielding
circled
him
back
from
toward
the
the center
fallout
of
his
the room.
family's arrogance.
Richard was finishing
The
his
irony
conversation
tasted bitter
with
and
Mr.
sweet all at
Tanaka.
once. He looked
They had
relieved,
disowned her for not
shaking the
being
investor's
enough.
hand vigorously.
Not knowing she was the
He
only
turned,
one who was too
scanning
much.
for Eleanor again.
She rested her chin
likely
on
to parade her
Lucas's
one more
shoulder,
time
closing
before
her
the night
eyes.
ended.
The
He
game
found
had
her standing
changed.
near the entrance
The pieces
of the
were
ballroom,
set,
ready
and
to
she was the
leave.
only one who
He
knew
walked
how
over,
the
his
board
energy
really worked.
high,
Fueled
fueled
by
by
the
the
perceived
perceived
success of
Tomorrow
the
we
evening.
start again.
You stayed close,
Tomorrow,
he said, sounding
Lucas
surprised.
echoed, pulling away
Good.
slightly to
It
look
looks
at her.
professional.
Whatever
He
happens,
reached for
we
her
face
arm,
it together.
his grip tight.
Together, she
Call me.
promised. We need to
But
take
as
a
she
photo
watched
for
him
the
walk
press.
toward the bedroom,
The merger
Elena
needs a
touched
face.
the pocket where her
Eleanor
phone
looked
lay.
at his hand on
The
her
weight
arm.
of the secret was
She
heavy.
did not pull
but
away
for the first time.
but she did not lean
She didn't
into
feel
him.
burdened by
She
it.
stood straight.
She
She
felt
felt
armed.
rigid. The
A
Sterlings
photo, she
thought they had
repeated.
won by cutting
Yes,
them
Richard.
off.
They didn't know they had just severed their own
walked toward the
lifeline.
designated backdrop.
And she H.
where
Lucas slept
photographers were
fitfully.
waiting.
His brow
The
furrowed
flashes
even
began
in
again,
rest.
blinding
She
and
watched
hot.
the rise and
Richard
fall of
pulled
his
her
chest,
close, his arm around her waist, pulling
she
her
knew
into
that
his
when
side.
he woke, he
The
smiled
reality
for
of
the
yesterday
cameras,
would
the
crash
picture of a
down
power
on him
couple
all over again.
Eleanor smiled
The
too,
boardroom, the
but her
ultimatum,
eyes were open,
the rejection,
wide and clear.
It wasn't a dream.
She looked straight into the
It was their
lens.
life now.
She was not
She slipped
looking
out
at
of
the
bed
future
quietly,
careful
She was
not
looking
to
at the
wake him.
past. The
Closing
apartment
the
was
door.
cold. One of the
heating had
photographers
been paid
called out
for the month.
Look here.
But the knowledge
Look here.
that future bills
Richard
were now
turned
their
his head
sole
to kiss her cheek for
responsibility
the shot.
made the chill feel
Eleanor
penetrating.
turned her face slightly.
Elena walked to the
so his
kitchen
lips grazed
and touched
her
the phone
jawline
in her
instead.
pocket.
It
A
was
subtle
a secret
rejection,
weight,
a
invisible
stone of
to the
power
photos,
in a
but
sea
felt
of
deeply
uncertainty.
by him.
She could
He
fix
stiffened,
this,
but kept smiling.
She could make a call.
The flashes
and the Sterling's
Sterling's
threats
threats
would
would
vanish.
They
But
captured
would
the
Lucas
wealth,
ever look
the
at her the
status,
same
the
way
union.
again?
But
Would
they
he
could
feel
not
like a
capture
project
the
she had
truth.
saved?
They could not
The love they
capture the
shared
fact
was
that
built
the
on
woman
equality.
standing beside him
On
was
two
already
people
gone.
fixing broken
They
things
could not
together.
capture the fact
If she
that
revealed
the
herself
foundation
as the
beneath them
savior,
was sand.
the balance would
When
tip.
the session ended,
He would feel
Richard
indebted.
released her immediately.
And pride, she knew.
Excellent, he
was
said,
a fragile
checking his
thing in
phone.
a man who had
We
just
can go.
lost his inheritance.
I have another call.
Lucas
He
appeared
started
in the doorway,
walking toward the
rubbing
exit
his eyes.
without waiting to see
He
if
wore
she
the
was
same
following.
clothes from yesterday.
Eleanor stood for a
wrinkled and
moment,
weary.
watching his back.
Morning,
he rasped.
He was already moving on
He
to
tried
the
to
next
smile,
task,
but it
the
was a
next
ghost of his
conquest,
usual
the next
warmth.
thing to own.
Morning.
He did not look
Elena
back.
replied,
He
turning on the
assumed she would
kettle.
follow.
I made
He
coffee.
assumed she always would.
You're an angel.
Eleanor took
he
a
said,
deep breath,
walking over
filling
to kiss
her lungs
cheek.
with the scented
His
air
lips
of the
were
ballroom
cold.
one last
He
time.
leaned against the counter.
She adjusted her clutch,
staring at the
feeling
small
the
stack
key
of mail
inside.
on the table.
She began to walk.
I should check the accounts.
She matched his pace.
See where we
but
stand
she was
with
not
the shop
following
supplies.
him. She was
Elena's
walking
heart
alongside him
tightened.
toward
She
the end
knew
of
what
the
he would
road.
find.
As they
Arthur
exited the
Sterling
hotel
had
into the
connections
cool
with
night
every
air,
major bank
the
in the
limousine
city.
was waiting.
Lucas.
Richard
she
opened the
started,
door and
but
slid
he was
in,
already moving
staring
to
at
his
his
laptop.
screen. Eleanor
Just a quick
paused
check
before entering,
he said, opening
She
the
looked
browser.
up at the hotel.
He logged
towering
in, his
above
fingers
them,
tapping
a
nervously
monument
on the
to human
keys.
ambition.
The loading
Then she
circle
looked at the
spun
car,
for a few
the
seconds,
metal cage
an
that
eternity
carried them
in the
through
quiet
the
room.
world.
She
Then
got
a
in.
message popped up.
The door closed.
Account frozen.
The
pending
silence
review.
returned.
Lucas
But it was
stared at the
different now.
screen.
It was
He
not
blinked,
the silence
refreshed
of
the
the
page.
page.
It
The
was the
message
silence of
remained.
the calm before
He tried
the
another
storm.
account.
Richard typed
Access
on his
denied.
tablet.
He let out a
Unaware
short,
that the countdown
humorless
had
laugh.
begun.
He didn't
Eleanor
wait,
looked out the
Lucas
window,
said, his voice
watching
hollow.
the city lights.
I knew
blur
he would,
past.
but
She
was
didn't
ready.
think he'd move this
The
fast.
humiliation of tonight
He's freezing
was the
everything
fuel for tomorrow.
The business
He had
account
treated her
my
as a
personal
nobody.
savings. Soon,
He's trying to starve
he would
us
learn
out.
exactly what a
Elena
nobody
walked
could do
over and
when
placed
they
a
had
hand
nothing
on
left
his
to
shoulder.
lose.
She
The
could
car
feel the
merged
tension
into traffic,
radiating from his
carrying them
muscles,
home
tight as
to
steel
the mansion that
cables.
would soon belong
We
to
have
Diot
cash from the
after
shop.
him.
We'll
The
manage.
cool night air biting
For how
at her
long,
exposed
Elena?
shoulders.
Lucas stood up.
She did not
pushing
shiver.
the laptop away.
She had
as
learned
if
to
it
endure
burned
the
him.
cold long.
He
before
began to
tonight.
pace the small kitchen.
They walked to the front door.
He's not
in
just cutting me
silence.
off.
The
He's
keypad
sending a
beeped
message.
as Richard entered the code.
He wants me to come crawling
and the
back.
heavy door swung
He
open.
wants me to bring you to
The foyer
him
was dark,
and tell you it's
save
over.
for the small night
He stopped
light near
and
the
looked at her.
staircase.
His eyes
Richard
filled with a
flicked on the
mixture
main
of anger
chandelier.
and despair.
The sudden
I
brightness
can't let him
harsh
win,
and
but
unforgiving.
I can't let you suffer
It
because
exposed
of my
the dust
stubbornness.
motes dancing in the air.
I am not suffering.
The slight
Elena said
imperfection in
firmly.
the marble floor.
She stepped into his
the
path,
weariness in
forcing
Eleanor's
him to look
posture.
at her.
He did
I
not
am
remove
here
his jacket
by choice.
He did not offer
Do not
her
take
a
that
drink.
away from me
He
by
turned to
deciding
face
what I
her,
can endure.
standing in the center
But
of the
it's not
room,
fair.
blocking her
Lucas
path to the
shouted.
stairs.
The frustration
"We need to talk,"
finally
he said.
boiling over.
His voice was
He slammed
low,
his hand
stripped
against
of
the
the public
wall,
charm he
then
had worn
immediately
at the
winced,
gala, rubbing
It was
his
the voice
knuckles.
he used when
"You
firing
deserve better.
executives.
You deserve
Eleanor
stability."
stopped, her
And
hand resting
I
on the
dragged you
banister.
into a war I
The
can't
wood
win.
was smooth under her
We are
palm,
winning,
familiar.
Elena lied.
Is
her
this
voice
about the
steady.
gala? We are
She
still
asked,
standing.
her voice even.
That is a victory.
I thought it went well.
Lucas slumped
The
against the
investor
counter,
seemed pleased.
defeated.
Richard
I need to go to the
laughed,
shop.
a dry, humorless
I need to
sound.
work.
Please?
If I sit here, I'll
Tanaka
go crazy.
asked me about the cash
Okay,
flow
Elena
discrepancy
said.
you mentioned.
I'll come with you.
In front of
The
everyone.
walk to the watch shop
He
was
paused,
silent.
stepping
the city was
closer.
bustling.
You
People
undermined
rushing
me,
to
Eleanor.
jobs they hated.
You made me look weak.
Worrying about problems.
I asked
that
a question,
felt small
Richard.
compared to theirs.
A valid one. Elena
Validity
watched
is
Lucas
irrelevant
from the corner
if it
of her
damages
his confidence.
He walked with his head down. He began to pace, his shoes clicking loudly.
He felt
on the
exposed.
stone. Confidence
To the world
is
he was
the
still
only
a
currency
sterling
that matters.
but he knew he was now
And tonight
in
you
exile.
spent mine.
The shame was
He
a
stopped
physical
pacing
cloak
and
he
looked
wore.
at her, his
When
eyes
they arrived
cold
at the
and
shop,
calculating.
the familiar
I have
smell
been
of
thinking
oil
about this
and
for a
old wood
while.
greeted them.
About us.
It should have been comforting.
About the company.
Instead, it
The
felt
board
like
is
a
concerned.
cage.
Lucas
my
went
personal
straight to
life
the
is
workbench,
distracting.
They
A
think
loop
I am
and a
too
disassembled
settled,
clock.
too complacent.
His hands,
Eleanor
usually so
felt a
steady,
chill that had
trembled
nothing to
slightly.
do with the night air.
He tried to fit a gear
She knew
into
where
place,
this was going,
but it slipped.
She had seen the
clattering
signs
onto
in the way he
table.
looked at her.
Damn it!
Or rather,
he cursed,
how he
sweeping
looked
the
through
tools
her.
aside.
She had
He
seen the
buried
legal
his papers
papers
in his
hidden in
hands.
his study.
I can't
The
even
drafts
fix
he
a
thought
simple
she never
mechanism.
noticed. What kind of
She
man am
remained
I?
silent.
Elena
Letting him
moved
speak,
around the counter
letting him
and
hang
stood
himself
behind
with his
him.
own words.
She didn't speak.
Richard took a deep
She simply
breath,
placed her hands
straightening
on
his
his
tie
shoulders
as if
and
preparing
began
for
to
a
massage the
presentation.
tension away.
I need to restructure.
She could feel the heat
Not
of his
just
skin,
the company,
the rapid
my
pulse
life
in his neck.
I need to be agile.
You are a man who is
unencumbered,
hurting,
she whispered.
He looked at her.
Give yourself
And for
grace,
the first
Lucas.
time, he didn't
He
see
called
a
me
wife.
this morning.
He saw
Lucas
a line
said into
item
his
on a
palms.
budget sheet that could
My
be cut.
father. I want a divorce, he said. He just stated
the words
facts.
hung in the air.
He said the company's stock is dipping,
and I need you
because
to
of the
leave.
uncertainty
Tonight,
of my position.
Eleanor blinked.
He said I am
once
hurting
slowly.
shareholders.
Tonight,
He made me feel
she
like
repeated.
a criminal for wanting
Yes.
to be happy.
Tonight,
Elena's blood
the press
ran
needs a
cold.
narrative.
She knew the
A
stock
sudden
was
split.
dipping.
A focus
She had
on
seen
new
the reports
beginnings.
on her phone
If
when
you
she
stay
called
here,
Hawthorne.
even for a week,
It wasn't because
it looks
of
like a
Lucas.
negotiation.
It was because
It
Vance
looks like
Global
weakness.
had started
I need
quietly
you gone.
acquiring shares.
Pack a bag.
Creating market
Take what you
volatility.
need.
The
Her
rest will
father's
be sent
company was
later.
maneuvering.
His tone
and
was
Lucas
dismissive,
taking the blame.
as if he were asking
The
her
irony
to
was
move a piece of
suffocating.
furniture.
She was the cause
Eleanor
of the
looked
pressure,
around the foyer,
and he was the victim.
This house had been her
Lucas,
prison, but
she
it was
said, her
also
voice
her home.
trembling slightly.
She had planted the
It's not your
flowers in
fault.
the garden.
It feels
She had
like
chosen
it,
the
he
paint
murmured.
for the library.
He turned on the stool.
She had warmed
and
the
took her
cold
hands
spaces
in
he
his.
left empty.
His eyes were
And now he
red-rimmed.
was telling her she
Elena,
was nothing
I love
here.
you.
A more than
Nobody.
anything.
The pain
But
was
I can't
there,
ask
a sharp
you to stay
sting
in
in
the
her
chest,
sinking
but she
ship.
pushed it down.
If my father
She
wants
would
me
not
to
give him the
choose,
satisfaction
maybe I
of
should let you
tears.
go.
She
So
would
you
not
can be
give him
safe.
the drama he feared.
So you don't get dragged
You are
down with
asking
me.
me to leave the
The
marital
words hit her
residence
like a
at
physical
1 in the
blow.
morning.
This
She
was
said
the
calmly.
ultimatum working
Because
its
of a
poison.
business strategy.
She was trying to
I am
sacrifice
asking you to
himself
do
for
what
her.
is necessary,
Just as she was
Richard
planning
corrected.
to sacrifice her
Do not
truth
make
for
this
him.
difficult.
He thought
You
letting
have
her
no
go
income,
was an act
Eleanor.
of love.
You have no prospects,
Elena said.
Where will you go?
Pulling her hands
He
away
said it not with
slightly to cup his
concern,
face,
but with confidence.
You don't get to make that choice.
He believed
for me.
he held all the
That
cards.
is my choice.
He believed
and I
she was
choose
dependent
you.
on him
Do you
for
understand?
every breath she took.
I am not a
It was
passenger.
the
in your
arrogance
life,
of a man
Lucas.
who had never been
I
told
am your
no.
partner. I will
But
manage.
I have nothing
she
to
said.
give you.
Her
He
voice was
whispered.
quiet. I'm broke.
But it carried a strength that
disowned.
made Richard pause.
I'm nothing.
He
You are
frowned,
everything.
searching her
She
face for
countered,
the crack,
tears
the
breaking her
breakdown.
eyes.
He found
You
none.
are honest.
You should be
You are
grateful,
kind.
he said, his
You
voice
are
rising
real.
slightly.
Money comes and
I am
goes.
letting you go with dignity.
Families fade.
No scandal.
But what we have,
no
that is
investigation
rare.
into your
Don't
spending.
throw it away because
I
you
am
are
protecting
scared.
your reputation.
Lucas looked at her,
Eleanor almost
searching
smiled.
for any sign of
He
doubt.
thought he was protecting
He found
her.
none.
He thought he was
leaned
the hero
forward
of the
and rested
story.
his forehead
Where are the
against
papers?
hers.
I'm
She
so
asked.
scared, Elena.
Richard
I
reached
know,
into his
she
inner
breathed.
jacket pocket.
But I'm here.
and pulled out
They
a
stayed
folded
like that for a
document.
long moment.
He held it out
breathing
to her.
in sync.
Sign this.
But over Lucas's
It waives
shoulder,
your claim to
Elena's
the
eyes
assets.
opened.
In
She
exchange,
looked at the phone,
I will
sitting
provide a
on the
monthly
workbench.
stipend.
It buzzed
Enough
silently.
to live comfortably.
A text from Hawthorne.
Modestly. The
Eleanor
board is
took
ready
the
for your
paper.
directive.
She did not read
The
it.
sterling acquisition
She knew what it
is
said.
at 49%.
It was the same draft she
One
had
more
seen
push,
weeks ago,
and we control the
She
vote.
folded it neatly.
She looked
and
back
placed
at
it in her
Lucas.
clutch.
He was
next to the
closed his
key.
eyes.
I will
finding
review it,
peace
she
in her
said.
presence.
There is no
If she
time
told
to
him
review,
now, the peace
Richard
would shatter.
insisted.
He would
Sign
feel
it now.
manipulated. So I know
He
you
would
understand.
feel like a pawn in her game.
Eleanor looked at him.
She couldn't do that
The
to
man
him.
she had loved once
She had
was
to
gone,
protect him from the
replaced
truth
by this
until he
stranger
was strong
in a
enough to
tailored
stand
suit.
beside her.
There
as
was
an
no
equal,
point in arguing.
not beneath her.
There was
as
no
a
point in
beneficiary.
pleading.
She
He
had
made
made
his
his
decision.
decision.
She
And
would
in
not
doing
reveal
so,
her
he had
identity
made
yet.
hers.
She
I
would
will not
use her
sign it
power
tonight,
to
Richard,
stabilize the
but I will
situation
leave.
from the shadows.
I do not need your
She
stipend.
would stop her company from
I do not
crushing
need your
sterling
permission.
completely.
Richard
Giving
scoffed.
them enough rope to
Do not
hang
be naive,
themselves,
but
You
not
cannot
enough to
survive
destroy
out there.
Lucas's
You
legacy
are not built
entirely.
for it. You are
She
a
would
creature
become
of
the
this
invisible
house,
hand
of
that
my
guided
world.
them to safety.
Eleanor stepped
It was a
past
lonely
him,
path,
moving toward the
She
staircase.
would have to bear the weight of the
I am leaving
secret
now,
alone.
she said.
I need to
Do
make
not
a
wait
call.
up. Elena
She
said
began to
softly,
climb the
pulling
stairs.
away.
To my
Richard
cousin,
called after her.
about
Do
some
not
family
take
money.
anything valuable.
Maybe we can get a
The
small
jewelry
loan
belongs
to
to
keep
the
shop
company.
running.
Eleanor
Lucas
stopped
looked
on the
up,
third step,
hope flickering in his
She
eyes.
reached up and
You do that?
unclasped the diamond necklace.
Ask your family for help.
It fell into her hand.
They owe me,
heavy
Elena
and cold.
said, her voice steady.
She turned and looked
It wasn't
down
a
at
lie,
him.
not entirely.
Keep them, she said.
Let me handle
They
this.
were never mine.
You focus on
She
the
placed
watches.
the necklace on the
Let me
banister
fight this
post.
battle.
Leaving it
Lucas
there gleaming
hesitated
in the light. His
Pride
Then she
warred with his
continued up the
necessity.
stairs. Finally,
Richard
he
stood
nodded.
below, watching
Okay,
her go.
thank you.
He felt a flicker
I-
of unease.
I don't know what I'd do
She was
without
too calm.
You'll
Too
never have to
composed,
find out, he
she
expected,
promised.
screaming. She
He
walked to the
expected
back
bargaining
office
and closed the
He
door.
expected her to beg.
Her hands shook
Her
as she
silence
dialed
was
Hawthorne.
unnerving. When he
It felt
answered,
like a
her voice
rejection
was
of his
cold,
authority.
commanding.
He
shook
Mr.
the feeling
Hawthorne.
off. Change
She
of
was
plans.
bluffing.
She
Ms.
had nowhere to
Vance?
go. The lawyer
She would be
sounded
back in a
surprised.
week, humble
Is everything
and ready
all
to
right?
sign.
No,
Eleanor
she
walked
said,
into their
looking through the
bedroom.
thin wall at
It
Lucas,
looked exactly
who had
as
picked
it
up
had
his
this
tools
morning,
again.
but it
He was
felt
trying
like
to
a
fix the
different
gear
room.
he
he had dropped. A museum exhibit. He was trying to fix himself. She went to the closet. Do not initiate and took out a small suitcase. Not yet. She did not pack the I want you to stabilize the stock. She did not pack the jewelry he had mentioned. Give them breathing room. She packed simple clothes. That is unconventional. Sweaters. Hawthorne noted. Things he had never seen her wear. They threatened you. He didn't approve of. Why would you help them? She packed her passport. Because he is in there. She packed the key to the safe deposit slightly. And if I destroy memories, she wanted to destroy a part of him, leaving the rest behind. I need to save the company. She walked around the room. It was touching. Can you do that? There was a pause on the line. The windowsill. It will be difficult. The bed. But yes, she was saying goodbye. We can create a shell to Richard, but to the anonymous herself that had lived here. Do it. Elena that woman was tired, and Mr. Hawthorne was ready to rest. Not a word to anyone. She zipped the suitcase, especially not to Lucas. The sound was loud in the quiet. As you wish, Ms. Vance. She picked up the handle. She hung up and leaned against the door. She had traveled down until she sat on the floor. She could do it again. The tears came. She walked back downstairs. Richard was still in the foyer, standing in the same spot, looking at darkened window. He looked up as she descended. He saw the suitcase. Strong. His eyes widened the wall between Lucas
"You are
and the
actually
storm.
leaving," he said.
When she walked back out,
it sounded like
Lucas
disbelief.
looked up.
"Did
I told you
agree?
I would. They will
Eleanor
transfer the
replied.
funds tomorrow."
She walked to the
Elena
front
said,
door,
forcing a
She
smile.
did not look back.
Lucas let out a
Richard
long
stood up,
breath, his
moving
shoulders
toward her.
dropping.
"Wait,
You saved us,
we need to
Elena.
discuss the
You
logistics."
saved us.
The
She
press
corrected
release.
gently.
Eleanor
She walked
opened
over
the
and
door.
kissed him.
The night
She
air
tasted
rushed
the
again.
salt of his relief.
"There is nothing to discuss."
But as she held
said.
him,
she
he
felt
wanted
the
distance
gone.
growing.
"I am gone."
The secret was a
You wanted a
wedge,
nobody,
invisible
You have
but
won.
real.
She
She was
stepped out onto
protecting
the
him,
porch,
but she was
The
also
cool air
hiding
felt
from him.
liberating. She
Richard
wondered how
followed
long
her
she
to the
could keep
doorway.
this up.
You cannot
How
just
long
walk
before
away.
the truth came out.
He shouted, his
And when it
composure
did,
finally
would
cracking.
he forgive her for the lie?
You are my wife.
The day wore on.
This is my house.
Customers came
Eleanor
and
turned
went,
to face him one
unaware
last
of the
time.
drama unfolding.
The light
behind
from the
counter.
foyer framed her
Lucas
silhouette.
worked with renewed
She
focus.
looked small against
the
the
weight lifted
vastness of the
slightly.
night.
But
Elena
she stood
watched
tall,
him.
her heart
Not
full
anymore,
of love
she said
and
softly.
heavy with fear.
Goodbye, Richard.
She had chosen to protect
She turned
him,
and walked down
but
the
she
steps.
knew that protection came
She did
with a
not wait
price.
for the driver.
She was walking
She
a
did not wait
tightrope
for a
over
car.
a canyon of secrets.
She walked toward the gate.
As evening fell,
her suitcase
they
wheels
locked up the
clicking
shop.
on the pavement.
The street lights
Richard
flickered
stood in
on.
the doorway.
Lucas took
watching
her
her
hand as they
disappear
walked
into the
home.
darkness.
"I don't say it
He
enough,"
wanted to call her back,
he said quietly.
He wanted to
"But
assert
you are the
his
best
control.
thing that ever happened
But his
to
feet
me."
felt rooted to
Elena
the floor.
squeezed his hand.
He was alone,
hiding the
The
tremor
house
in
was
her
silent
fingers.
again.
"I know,"
But this
she
time,
said.
the silence
"And
was
you are
not
mine."
peaceful.
They
It
walked
was
into
hollow.
the night.
He closed
Two
the door.
figures against the
The
city
lock
lights.
clicked into place.
Elena looked
He
up
was
at
safe.
the sky.
He was in
where the
control.
first stars were
He had
appearing.
removed the problem.
She thought of the empire
He walked
she
back
owned,
into the living
the
room
power
and
she
poured a
wielded.
drink.
It meant
His hand
nothing
shook
compared
slightly.
to the warmth of
He told
sense
himself
that they
it
were
was
living
the
on
adrenaline.
borrowed time and
He told
borrowed
himself
money.
he had done the
He
right
spent
thing.
late nights
For the
poring
company,
over bank statements
for the future,
tracing the
He
origins
sat on the
of the
sofa,
loan that had
the
saved
leather
them.
cold against his
He couldn't
legs.
find the source.
He looked at the
and that
empty
terrified
space
him
beside
more
him.
than the debt itself.
He had won. To
He had
Lucas,
kicked her
mystery
out.
meant danger.
He had proven his
To
power.
Elena, it meant protection.
So why did the room feel
But the
so
wall
much
between
larger
them was
than it
growing
had an
thicker
hour ago?
with every secret
Why
she
did the
kept?
silence feel like it
One
was
evening,
pressing against
the rain
his ears?
returned.
He
took a
tapping
sip of
against
the
the window
drink.
pane just
It
as
burned
it had
good
on
on
the
down.
night they went to the
He
mansion.
looked at the diamond necklace.
Elena stood
still
by the
sitting
sink,
on the banister
washing a
post
single
where she
cup.
had left it.
Lucas
It
sat at the
sparkled
table,
in the dim
a
light,
letter in his
a
hand.
tiny star in the
It was
dark
from his
house.
father's lawyers.
It looked like a trap.
They had noticed the
He stood
influx
up and
of
walked
capital
over to
into
it.
their accounts.
He picked it up.
They were alleging
heavy.
irregularities.
Too heavy.
They were
He
threatening
tossed
an
it
audit.
onto the table.
They know.
It clattered
Lucas said,
loudly.
his voice devoid
He
of
needed
emotion.
to sleep. He didn't
Tomorrow
look up.
was a new day.
They say the funds
Tomorrow
are
he would
suspicious.
fix the bank issue.
They say if I don't
Tomorrow
return
he
the
would
money
issue the
and
press
sever
release.
ties with questionable
Tomorrow he would move
influences,
on.
He
They'll
walked up
report
the
me to
stairs,
authorities.
passing the spot.
Elena
where she had
dried
left
her
the
hand
necklace.
slowly,
He
turning
did not
to
look
face
at him.
He
Her
went
heart
into the
hammered
bedroom
against her
and closed
ribs.
the door.
She had anticipated
Outside,
this.
Eleanor walked
The Sterlings
until
were
she reached
thorough.
the end of the driveway.
They would sniff out any
A
anomaly.
car was waiting
any
there,
weakness.
not a limousine,
And she was the
but a
anomaly.
modest sedan.
It's a bluff.
The
Lucas.
driver stepped out.
They want to
and
scare
opened the
you.
trunk.
Is it?
She placed her
Lucas
suitcase
finally
inside.
looked at her. She got
His
into
eyes
the back
were
seat.
dark,
The
filled with
interior was
exhaustion
clean,
that went
simple.
beyond
No
sleeplessness.
leather, no champagne.
Where did the money come
Just
from,
fabric
Elena?
and space.
You told me it
Where
was
to
a family
Mrs.
loan.
Sterling?
But I
The
called
driver
your cousin.
asked.
She
Eleanor
doesn't
looked
know
back
anything
at the
about
mansion
it.
one last
The
time.
air left the room.
The lights were still
Elena
on in the
froze.
foyer.
She
She
could
could
imagine
imagine
Richard pacing.
She could tell him the
drinking,
truth now.
trying to convince
She
himself
could walk
he was
over
right.
to him.
The
Take
penthouse,
letter,
she said,
and make a phone
the one
call
under
that
my
would
name.
silence his father.
The driver
forever.
nodded and closed
She
the
could
door.
reveal that she was
The
the
car
heir
pulled
to
away,
Vance Global,
smooth and quiet.
that she owned the debt.
Eleanor leaned
that
back.
she was the one holding
She took
the
the
power.
key from her clutch,
But the timing was wrong.
She held it up to the light.
It was still too raw.
It was small.
If she revealed it now,
but it
after
opened
he
the
had been
door to
threatened,
everything.
after he had
She was
sacrificed
no longer
his
a wife.
inheritance for her.
She was no longer
It
a
would look
nobody.
like manipulation.
She was the owner.
It would look like
And
she
she
had
would be
let him
back,
suffer,
not
just
tomorrow.
to prove a point.
Not next week.
It would look like revenge.
But soon.
And when she
I
returned,
had to protect us.
she would not be
Elena
knocking
said,
on the
her
door.
voice trembling.
She would be unlocking
She couldn't
it.
say more
The
without
car
saying
merged onto
everything.
the highway.
By lying,
leaving the mansion
Lucas stood
behind
up,
in the rearview
the chair
mirror,
scraping harshly
shrinking
against
into the
floor.
distance until it was
I
just
chose you
another
over
million,
leaned her head
Elena.
against the window.
I chose you over
The
my
glass
family.
cool against her
I did
temple.
that because I thought
The vibration
we were
of the
partners.
engine was a
But
steady
you're keeping
hum,
secrets.
a lullaby of
Big
motion
secrets.
that carried her
And
away
now
from
my
the
father
life
is
she had
using those
just left
secrets to
behind.
try to destroy me.
She did not look back.
He rubbed his face.
She kept
his
her
voice
eyes
breaking.
fixed on the road
I
ahead.
can't do this. Where the lights of the city
fight a
blurred
war
into
where I
streaks
don't
of
even know
gold
who
and
the
white.
enemy is.
Marcus,
Is it
the
my
driver,
father?
glanced at
Or
her
is
in
it
the
you?
mirror. The words
His
struck
eyes
her
were
like a
kind,
physical blow, lacking the
she saw the
subservient
doubt in his
deference of
eyes.
the staff at the
It
mansion.
wasn't anger.
It
He
was
had worked for
betrayal.
her long
He
before
felt
she had ever met
powerless.
Richard.
And
Back
she
when was
realized
just
then
Eleanor
that her
Vance,
protection was
building
becoming
her
his
own
prison.
consultancy firm
As long
from
as
a
she was
small
here,
office downtown.
hiding her power,
He knew the
he would
secret
always
that
feel
Richard
like he
had
was
never
never
bothered
bothered
to
to
uncover.
uncover, failing to
He
protect
knew
her.
that the woman sitting
He would
in the
always
back
be
seat
looking
was
over
not
his
a
shoulder,
dependent spouse,
waiting for the
but
other
a
shoe to
partner in
drop.
several venture
He
capital
needed to stand
firms
on his
that
own.
operated under
He
holding
needed to know
companies
he could
Richard had
survive
never
without
audited.
her, without
Are
her
we going
money,
to the Vance
without
Tower?
her secrets.
Marcus asked,
and she
his
needed
voice
to build
low
her
and steady,
empire
without
Eleanor
the shadow
shook her
of his
head
family's
slightly.
prejudice
No,
hanging over her
the penthouse
every
on
move.
Fifth.
She
I
made
need
the
quiet
decision in
tonight.
that moment.
Marcus
It
nodded.
was the hardest thing she had
Understood.
ever done.
I will inform
Harder than
security
facing
his
to expect
parents.
you.
harder than
hiding
hiding
the
the
letter
letter
in
in
her
her
bag.
bag. The Vance Tower.
She had to let him go.
Her name on a building.
Not because she stopped
Richard
loving
thought
him,
he was the
but
only
because she
architect
loved
of
him enough
wealth
to
in
let
the
him find his
relationship.
own strength.
He had never
And
asked
she
about
needed
her
to
days
find
when
hers
she said
without
she was
him
having
looking
lunch
down
with
on her
friends.
from a pedestal
He had
she
never
secretly
questioned the
built.
late nights when
"You're
she
right,"
said she
Elena said
was
softly.
reading.
She
had
walked
assumed
over
her
to the
silence
table
was
and placed her
emptiness.
hands on the wood.
It was actually
steadying
containment.
herself.
She had kept
You
her
shouldn't have
success
to fight
hidden
to
this
protect
war.
him initially.
Not like this.
When they first
What does that
married,
mean?
his ego was
Lucas
fragile,
asked, bruised
sensing
by
the
early
shift in her
failures.
tone.
The
She had
anger was
swallowed her
fading,
own
replaced
achievements
by
to let him
fear.
shine.
It means I'm
Believing
leaving,
that love
she
meant
said.
sacrifice.
The words felt.
Over time,
like glass
the
in her
sacrifice
throat.
had become a habit.
Lucas stepped back
and the
as if
habit
she
had
had
become
pushed
a
him.
cage.
What?
But the assets
No.
remained.
Elena, no.
The accounts
We
remained.
can fix this.
And now the
We
cage
can
was
return the
open.
money.
The car
can.
exited the highway,
There's nothing to
winding
fix,
through
Lucas.
the quieter,
She
upscale
interrupted,
streets
her
of the
voice gaining
residential
strength.
district. She couldn't
Here,
let him
the
argue.
buildings were older,
If he
made of
argued,
brick
she
and
would break.
stone,
You
rooted
need
in
to be
history
free
rather than
You
glass
need to
and
rebuild
steel.
your life without.
Marcus pulled up to a
without
discreet
complicating
entrance,
it.
guarded by a
Your
doorman
family
who
wants you to
stepped out
choose?
immediately upon
Fine.
seeing the car.
I'm choosing for you.
He did not look at
I don't
Eleanor
want you
with
to
pity.
choose for me. He looked at her
Lucas
with respect.
shouted, rounding
He
the
opened the
table
door
to grab her arms.
"Welcome home, Mrs.
I want you to
Vance,"
stay.
he said. "I want us
The use
to
of
fight
her maiden
together."
name was a
And
deliberate
that's exactly
choice.
the problem.
A key turning in
Elena
a lock
said.
that Richard
Tears
did not
finally
possess.
spilling over.
Eleanor
She
stepped
didn't
out,
wipe them away.
taking a deep
We
breath
aren't
of the
fighting
night air.
together.
It
I'm
smelled
fighting
of
for
rain
you,
and concrete.
and you're fighting against
Thank
them.
you, James.
And in the middle,
Please
we're
ensure
losing
the
us.
car is stored
You need to know
securely.
who you are without
I may
me,
need it early
Lucas.
tomorrow.
And I need
She
to know
walked
who I
into the
am
lobby.
without you. Her
That's
suitcase wheels
cowardice,
clicking on the
he
marble
whispered,
floor.
his grip on her arms
The security
loosening.
guard behind the
You're
desk
running
stood
away.
up.
Maybe,
Mrs.
she
Vance
admitted.
We were
Or
not
maybe I'm
expecting
giving
you
you the
until
chance to
next
win.
week. If I
Plans
stay,
changed,
you'll
she
always
said
wonder if you
softly.
succeeded because
I need
of
full
you
privacy
or
tonight.
because of me.
No calls.
Because of my
No
connections,
visitors.
my secrets.
Unless it is
I
from
won't
my
be that
legal
doubt
team.
in your mind.
The guard nodded
She pulled away
vigorously.
from him and
Of
walked
course.
toward the bedroom. The elevator
She didn't
waited
pack
with
much.
its doors open.
She took a small
She stepped
suitcase
inside
from the
and
closet.
pressed the button for the
She
top
folded
floor.
a few clothes.
As the
simple
doors
things.
closed,
She
sealing
left
her
the
in
gifts
the mirrored
he had
box,
given her on the
she
dresser.
finally allowed her
She left
shoulders
the
to
money
drop.
they had saved
The
together
posture
on
of the
kitchen
perfect
counter.
wife slipped away.
She would take only her
replaced by
memories.
the stance of a
The
woman
watch she
who
had fixed
commanded
for her.
rooms without
The
speaking.
photo of them in the park.
The elevator chimed.
The love that lived
and the
in her
doors
heart,
opened
which
directly
she couldn't
into her
pack
private
away no
foyer.
matter how hard
The
she
penthouse
tried.
was not large
Lucas
like the
followed
mansion,
her to the
but it was
doorway.
warm. He leaned
The
against
lights
the
were on a
frame,
timer,
watching her
glowing
pack.
softly as she
He looked
entered.
broken. There were no
If you walk
portraits
out that
of
door,
ancestors on
Elena,
the walls.
I don't know
no
if I can
trophies
bring
of
you back.
conquest.
I'm not
There were
asking you
books,
to.
thousands
She
of
said,
them,
zipping the suitcase.
There were paintings she had bought
She stood
because
up
she
and
loved
faced
them.
him.
Not
The
because
distance
they
between them was
appreciated
only
in
a few
value.
feet. There was
But
a
it felt
piano
like
in the corner
miles.
that she actually
You will
played.
be okay, Lucas.
This was her space.
You were stronger than you
her
know.
sanctuary.
Stronger than
She
your
walked
father
to the
knows.
center of the living room.
Prove it to them.
And set the suitcase
Prove it to
down.
yourself. The
And
silence
what
here
about
was
us?
not heavy.
He asked.
It
his
was
welcoming.
barely a whisper.
It did not demand
the
anything
end?
from her.
Elena looked
She
at
walked
him,
to the window.
memorizing the curve
From this
of his
height,
jaw. She could
color
see
of
the
his
city
eyes.
spread out below.
She wanted to
a
tell
grid
him,
of life and energy.
"Wait for me.
Somewhere
When I
out
come
there
back,
in the hills
I
was
will
the
be your
mansion.
equal in every
She
way."
could not see it from
But
here,
she couldn't.
she knew it was there.
Not yet.
She
I don't
imagined
know,
Richard
she said
inside,
honestly.
pacing, drinking.
But right
trying to
now, this
convince
is the
himself
only
that
way
he
I
had
can
won.
protect you.
He believed
From
he had
them.
discarded a burden.
And from me.
He did not
She
know
picked
he
up
had
the
released
suitcase.
a competitor. It felt light,
Eleanor turned
but her
from the
soul
window
felt heavy.
and walked to her study.
She walked past him
It was a
into
small
the living
room,
lined with
He didn't
shelves
stop
of
her.
files and
He
documents.
stood in the bedroom doorway.
She sat at the desk,
watching her
and
go,
opened the top
like a
drawer.
ghost haunting
Inside
his
lay a
own life.
laptop and
At
a
the front
secure
door,
phone.
Elena paused.
She powered on the
Her
laptop,
hand on the knob,
the screen
She wanted to
glowing
turn
in the dim
around.
room. She wanted to
logged
throw
into the
herself
secure
into his
server,
arms,
her
and tell
fingers
him
moving
everything.
quickly over the keys.
I am the heir. She
I am the
accessed the
solution.
financial portfolios
I am
that
yours.
Richard knew nothing
But the
about.
image of his father,
The numbers on the
sneer flashed
screen
in
were
her mind.
substantial. The
Enough to
accusation
buy
of
and sell
manipulation.
companies like
If
his
she told him
without
now,
breaking a sweat.
the victory would be
She had
tainted.
built this quietly.
It had to be earned,
brick by brick.
Don't wait
While
for
he
me.
was busy
she
building
said,
his
not
empire
looking
of
back.
glass.
Live your life.
She opened
Lucas.
a new file.
Be
and
happy.
began to type.
Elena, acquisition
called out
targets.
one last plea.
She paused.
She
her
opened the
fingers
door.
hovering over the
hallway
keys.
air was cold.
She thought about the
Goodbye,
mansion.
Lucas.
It was not
She
just
stepped
a
out
house.
and closed the door.
It was the
headquarters.
The click of the
ego.
latch was the loudest
to own it
sound
would be
she had
to
ever
own the
heard.
symbol of his power.
It sealed the past,
But she needed to be careful.
She stood in the hallway for
if
a
she
moment.
moved too
listening.
fast, he would suspect.
She heard nothing.
If she moved
No
too
footsteps.
slow, he
No
might sell
cries.
it to someone else
Just
to cover
silence.
his debts.
He was respecting
She picked
her
up the
wish.
secure phone.
He was
and
letting her
dialed
go.
a number from memory.
Elena walked to
It
the
rang
elevator.
twice before a voice
Her legs
answered.
felt like lead.
Eleanor? She pressed the
The
button
voice
and
was
waited.
male, professional.
When the doors
laced
opened,
with concern.
she stepped inside
It was
and
Arthur,
turned
her
around.
lawyer.
The
He
door
was
to
one
their
of the few
apartment
people
was
who
still
knew the
closed.
full extent of her
She
holdings.
wondered if he was standing
I am
on the
safe,
other
Arthur,
side of
she
it,
said.
hand on the
I have
wood,
left the
just
residence.
like her.
I need you
the
to
elevator
begin the
descended,
preliminary work.
the
we
tears
discussed.
came freely now.
There was a pause on
She
the other
cried
end.
for the love she was
Are you
leaving
sure,
behind.
Eleanor?
Once
Once
we
cried
start,
for the pain
there
she
is
was
no
causing.
going back.
But beneath
You will
the
know it
sorrow,
was you.
a steel
I want him to
resolve
know,
was
she
hardening.
replied, her voice
She was
firm.
no longer just
But not
Elena,
yet.
the watchmaker.
Not until the papers
She was
are
Elena
signed.
Vance. I want him
And
to
she had
feel the
work to
ground
do.
shift before
She
he sees
exited the
crack.
building into the night.
Arthur sighed softly.
The rain had stopped.
I will draft
leaving
the shell
streets
company
slick
documents
and
tonight.
reflective.
We can
A
use
black
the
car was
offshore
waiting
entity
for her
from
around
the
the
Cayman
corner.
portfolio. Hawthorne's
It
driver.
will obscure the trail
She had called him
until the
10
final
minutes
transfer.
ago. She got
Good,
into
she
the
said.
back seat. And Arthur?
Where to, Ms. Vance?
Yes.
the driver
Make sure the
asked.
valuation.
Elena
includes
looked at the
emotional
apartment
premium.
building one last time.
He loves that
through the
house
tinted
more than he
window.
loves the company.
She could see a light
He will
on.
not
in
let
their
it go
window.
easily unless
Lucas
the
was
price
there,
is right.
alone,
Or unless he has
the
no
office,
choice.
she said.
I prefer no choice,
Arthur
Arthur
said.
Vance
I will
Global
work on the
headquarters.
leverage.
As you
The
wish.
bank is already nervous.
The car pulled away from
A push
the
there
curb.
might collapse.
Elena
the credit
watched
line
the
he
apartment
used to
building
secure the
shrink in the
property.
distance.
Do it,
until
Eleanor
disappeared
said.
around a corner.
Quietly.
She
I will
touched
be in
the
touch
pocket
tomorrow.
where her phone lay.
She hung up the
She would
phone
not call
and
him.
placed it on the desk.
She would not write.
She leaned
She would
back in the
build.
chair,
She
looking
would
up at
rise.
the ceiling.
And when the
Time
time
was
was
right,
was finally
when
catching
the
up to
Sterlings
her,
were on their
a heavy
knees
weight
and
in her
Lucas
limbs.
was standing tall
But
on
she
his
could
own
not
merit.
sleep yet.
She would
She
return.
needed to process the
Not
shift.
as the girl they disowned.
She was no longer
but as the
Mrs.
woman
Sterling.
who owned the world they
She was
lived
Eleanor
in.
Vance again.
The city lights
The
blurred
name felt
past.
strange on her tongue.
Elena
after
wiped
so
her
many
eyes
years,
and straightened
like
her
a word
spine.
from A.
The grief was
Forgotten
there,
language,
but it was fuel now.
She stood up and
she
walked
opened
to
her
the kitchen.
laptop on the seat.
She made
beside
herself
her.
a cup of tea.
The screen glowed
the
in the
ritual
dark car.
soothing her nerves.
There were emails waiting.
The steam rose from
Proposals,
the mug, curling
mergers,
into the air.
acquisitions.
She held it with both hands.
The Sterling company
feeling the
was
warmth
struggling.
seep into her palms.
The anonymous help she had
She
provided
thought about
was
the
being
necklace she had
withdrawn.
left on the banister.
They would feel the pinch soon.
The diamonds.
She typed a
They were
command.
beautiful, but they were
Initiate
cold.
phase 2.
They represented
She
a
wasn't doing
transaction,
this to hurt
not
them.
a gift.
She was
She
doing
did
this
not
to
miss
clear
them.
the board.
She missed the
She
idea
needed to
of
reset
what they
the
were
game
supposed to
so
mean.
that when she and
She
Lucas
missed
met
the hope
again,
she had once had
there
that
would be
love
no
to conquer
shadows.
pride.
No secrets.
But hope was not a strategy.
No power imbalance.
Strategy was what
Just
she
two
had now.
people who had survived
She
the
took a sip
storm.
of the tea.
The car moved
bitterness
deeper
grounding
into the
her.
financial district.
She walked back
to
toward
the
the towering
study and opened the
skyscrapers
safe
that
behind
pierced
the
bookshelves.
Inside
Elena
was
watched
the
them
key
rise.
to the deposit
They looked like
box,
monuments,
along with other documents.
Soon, one of them would
Deeds,
bear her name.
titles.
She thought of
Proof
Lucas.
of ownership of her own
She
life.
hoped he was sleeping.
She took out a
She
folder
hoped he was
labeled
dreaming
Sterling
of something
Industries.
better.
I'm
Inside
sorry,
were the reports
she
she
was
had gathered
the
over
empty
the
car.
years.
But
The
you'll understand
discrepancies.
one day. The risky
The
loans.
driver didn't respond.
The hidden debts.
He simply
She
drove
had collected
on
them
into
not
the
to
heart of the
destroy
city,
him,
originally.
into the future.
She had collected
Elena
them
closed
to
her
protect
laptop.
him. To have
The
them ready
separation
when
was
the crash
complete.
came so she
The
could
pain
help
was
him
acute.
recover.
But the
But
path
tonight
was
had
clear.
changed everything.
She was the
He
heir
had
they
not
needed,
asked for help, but she wouldn't
He
give
had
them what
demanded
they
submission
wanted until they learned
He had chosen
what they
power
deserved.
over partnership.
And neither would Lucas.
So the documents would
They
no
would
longer
both
be a
rise
shield.
from the ashes of
They
this
would be a
breakup,
sword.
stronger. She
sharper,
ran her hand
ready.
over the paper.
As the car
It was
stopped at a
smooth,
red
innocent,
light,
but
Elena
it held
caught
the
her
power
reflection
to
in the
dismantle
window.
an empire.
She looked different.
She closed the folder.
The sadness
and
was
put
there,
it back in the
but
safe.
so was the power.
Not yet. The girl who
Tomorrow
had walked
was for
into the
resting.
Sterling mansion.
Tomorrow
in
was
a
for
mended
letting him
dress
think he had
gone.
won.
The woman
Let him
who
enjoy
walked out
the
of
silence
Lucas's
of the
house
house
was
for
something
one
else
night.
entirely.
Let him sleep in
She
the
was
bed
the storm,
that was now too large.
and into the black car.
Let him wake up alone.
The city had changed
The
with
psychological
seasons,
weight of that
shifting
would do
from
more
the damp
damage
chill of
than any
autumn to the
lawsuit.
crisp bite of winter.
She turned off the laptop
and now
and
into
the
the tentative
tentative
bloom of spring.
The room plunged
But
into
inside
darkness,
the towering glass
save for the
headquarters
city
of Vance
glow
Global,
filtering through the
climate
blinds.
was controlled.
She walked to the
constant, and
bedroom,
cold, leaving the suitcase
Elena stood by the
door.
floor-to-ceiling
She
window
would
of
unpack
her corner
later.
office.
She changed
Looking
into
down
simple
at the streets
pajamas,
far below.
cotton and soft.
The cars were mere
nothing like
specks,
the silk
the
gowns
people
Richard
invisible.
demanded.
From this
She
height,
climbed into
the
bed.
world looked manageable.
The sheets were clean
organized,
and smelled of lavender.
Nothing like the
She
messy,
pulled the covers up to her
painful
chin
reality of the
and
life
closed
she
her
had left
eyes.
behind.
For the first
She
time
turned
in
away
years,
from the window.
She did
the
not listen
reflection
for
of
the
catching
sound
of
of his
his glass.
footsteps. She
She
wore a
did not
suit
wonder
now,
if he was
tailored
angry.
and sharp.
She
A
did
far
not
cry
worry
from
about the
mended
schedule
dress
for the
she had
next
worn
day.
to the Sterling
There was
mansion.
only the quiet.
Her hair was pulled
And in
back,
the quiet,
her posture
she
rigid.
found her strength.
She looked like a CEO.
She was not a victim.
She felt like a ghost.
She was a survivor.
Ms. Vance.
And soon she
a
would
voice
be a
came
victor.
from the intercom.
Sleep came slowly,
The board is
but when it
assembled.
did, it was
Elena
deep.
took a deep breath.
She dreamed of
steadying
water.
her hands.
Not the stagnant
I'm coming.
water of a pool.
The boardroom
but
was
the
a
ocean.
cavern of polished
Vast,
mahogany
moving,
and
powerful.
soft lighting.
She was standing
12
on the
men
shore,
and women sat
watching
around
the
the
tide
table,
come in.
all older
It
than
washed
her,
over the sand,
all seasoned
erasing
veterans
the
of
footprints of the
industry.
past.
When she entered,
When she woke,
the conversation
was
died
rising.
instantly. The light
There was
streamed
still
into
skepticism
the room,
in the
bright
room.
and clear.
They saw her age.
She sat up,
They saw
stretching
her
her
gender.
arms.
They did
Today
not
was a
see
new
the
day.
air.
They saw
Richard
the
would be
girl.
waking up in the
They
mansion,
remembered the quiet
likely
beneficiary
hungover
who
and
had stayed
angry.
in the shadows.
He would be
for
calling
years.
lawyers.
They did
He
not
would be
know
calling
about
the
the
bank.
watchmaker's daughter.
He would be trying to
who had
control
learned
the
value
narrative.
of every second.
Eleanor stood up and
Elena
walked
took
to
her
the
seat
window.
at the head of the
The
table.
city was waking waking up
She
with
placed
her.
a single folder
Cars
in
moved
front
on
of
the
her.
streets below.
Good morning,
People
she
walked
said.
on the sidewalks.
Her voice was calm.
Life went on,
projecting effortlessly.
She placed her
to the
hand
back
on the
of
glass.
room.
I
Let's
am
discuss
coming,
the quarterly
she whispered to the
acquisitions.
reflection.
Mr.
Not
Henderson,
for revenge,
the senior board member,
for justice,
cleared his throat.
For the years of silence,
He leaned forward, his hands
for the dignity
clasped.
he tried to take.
Ms. Vance,
She
with
turned
all due
away from the
respect,
window.
Some of
and
us
went
are
to the
concerned
kitchen
about
to
your
make
strategy
coffee.
regarding
She had
the
work to
Sterling
do.
Industries debt.
The acquisition of
You've
the
been
mansion
buying
was
their
just
bonds
the first
aggressively,
step.
but
The
you haven't
restructuring
called
of
them
the
the
company
default.
would be the second.
You're holding a losing
and the
hand.
reclamation of her
Why?
name would be the
Elena
final
opened
act.
the folder.
She picked
She
up her
didn't
phone.
look at Henderson
It
immediately.
was time to make the first
She let
whose
the silence
eyes held
stretch,
a faint,
just for a
persistent
moment,
twitch near the
asserting her
temple.
control.
He had told
It's
himself
not a
that this
losing
was
hand,
freedom.
Mr. Henderson.
He had told himself
It's an investment
that the absence
in
of her
stability.
quiet presence
If Sterling
was a liberation
collapses,
from
it
constraint.
creates a vacuum in
But
the
as he
market.
buttoned his cufflinks,
Competitors will
the
rush
click
in.
of the metal sounded
Prices
too
will
loud in the
volatility.
empty room.
By holding the
There was
debt,
no one to talk
we
to,
control the pace
no
of
one
their
to ask about his
restructuring.
day.
But
There
you're
was
propping
only
up
the
a echo
echo
of his own
Henderson
movements.
pressed.
He walked
It
downstairs,
doesn't make financial
his footsteps
sense.
echoing on
Unless
the
there's
marble
something
floor.
else.
The staff
Elena
moved
looked
quietly,
up, meeting
efficiently,
his gaze,
but their eyes
her
avoided
eyes were
his.
steady. They knew.
Business is not just
in a
about
house
numbers.
this size, secrets
It's about
did not stay
ecosystems.
buried.
They
don't
knew
want
the
a dead
mistress was
competitor.
gone.
They
They
knew
knew
the
the
partner
master
who
was
knows
pretending
their place.
everything was fine.
She slid a document
Tonight,
across
he was
the table.
hosting a dinner.
Here are the
A
projections.
celebration of the new quarter.
By Q4,
he had called it.
Are holding in
But
sterling
everyone
will
knew
give
it was
us
voting
performance.
rights on their board.
He needed to
We
show
won't
the
destroy
world
them.
that Richard
We
Sterling
will
was
refine them,
untouched, and in doing so, we
and
secure our
stronger
own
than ever.
supply chain. He needed to
It
prove
was a
that he
half-truth.
did not need her.
The logic was
The doorbell
sound.
rang.
The projections
Richard
accurate.
smoothed his jacket,
But the motivation
and went
was
to answer
buried
himself,
deep beneath
a
layers
gesture
of
of
corporate
confidence.
speak.
His
She
guests
wasn't
arrived
doing
in
this
waves,
for the supply
a
chain.
collection of business
She
associates,
was doing it to ensure that when
socialites,
Lucas
and
finally
investors who
stood
fed
off
off
his success,
the ground beneath
they
him
filled the
wouldn't
grand
crumble.
dining hall
She
with
was building a
noise,
safety
clinking
net
glasses,
he didn't
and
know
forced
existed.
laughter.
Henderson
Chandeliers
studied the
sparkled above
document.
them. He looked at
Casting
the
light
light
on
on
the
the
empty
empty
chair
chair
at Richard's
They
right
murmured
hand.
among themselves.
He had not removed
Finally,
the second
Henderson
setting.
nodded slowly.
He wanted them to see it.
Very well.
He wanted them to
The
know
strategy
he had
holds.
chosen to sit alone.
Good.
Elena
Richard
said,
a man
closing
named
the folder.
Julian said,
Meeting
raising
adjourned.
a glass of wine.
As the board members
well.
filed out, the merger
Elena
news is
remained
fantastic.
The
Stock
adrenaline
is up
faded,
5%,
leaving
since
behind
the
the familiar
announcement.
ache in her
Richard
chest.
smiled. The
She had won
practice
them
curve
over.
of his lips automatic.
She had proven her competence.
It is only the beginning.
But there was no
Julian.
one to celebrate.
I have
with.
streamlined operations.
No one to share the victory.
Removed
She
unnecessary
picked up her phone
distractions.
and scrolled to a
Focus is
contact
key.
she never called.
He took a sip of
Lucas.
wine.
She
Taste
hovered
sharp
over the
and
name for a
acidic.
second.
He glanced
then
at the
locked
empty
screen.
chair again.
Later that
A woman
evening,
across the table,
office was
Mrs. Gable,
empty.
followed his
The
gaze.
cleaning crew moved
She was
quietly
older,
in the halls.
sharp-eyed, and missed nothing.
Elena sat at her desk.
And Eleanor?
The glow
She
of
asked
the computer
casually,
monitor
"Is she
illuminating
joining
her
us later?"
face. The air
Hawthorne
at the table
sat
seemed to
opposite her,
tighten,
reviewing a
Richard
stack
set
of
his glass
reports.
down with a
The
precise
supplier
click.
agreement is finalized.
Eleanor and I have parted
Hawthorne
ways,
said,
he said,
his
sliding
voice
a paper
level.
toward her.
It was a mutual
The
decision.
small watch component
She needed
manufacturers
space.
in the
I needed
district.
focus.
We
It
own
is
them
better
now.
this way.
Elena
Better
picked
for
up
the
the
company.
paper.
Better
These were
for
the
everyone.
suppliers Lucas used.
Mrs. Gable nodded
The
slowly,
ones his father had
but her
threatened
eyes
to cut
lingered
off.
on him.
Will they
Of course,
continue
she
to
said,
supply Sterling?
but she was a
independent
lovely
retailers?
presence.
The
Yes,
house feels
Hawthorne confirmed.
different without her.
Under the new
Richard
contract,
felt a flare of
they are
irritation,
obligated to
hot and
fulfill
sudden.
all existing
He
orders.
suppressed it.
No matter
The
who
house is
places
exactly
them.
as it should be.
Elena let
He
out a
replied
breath
coolly.
she didn't know she was
It is a
holding.
home for work,
Good.
not a social
Keep
club.
it anonymous.
Let us talk about
Use
the
the shell
projections
company.
for next year.
Elena,
He
Hawthorne
steered the
said, his
conversation
tone
back
shifted
to business,
from lawyer to friend.
talking louder.
How long can you
faster,
keep this up?
filling the silence?
You're running a
that
global
threatened to creep
conglomerate
in.
by day.
He spoke
and
of
playing
expansion,
guardian angel
of
by night.
acquisitions, of dominance.
You haven't slept more than
He
4
felt the
hours a night
adrenaline
in
pumping,
months.
the high
I
of being
sleep
the
enough,
center of attention.
she said,
Though
He
the
was
dark
winning.
circles under
He
her
was
eyes
controlling the
betrayed her.
narrative.
How is
But
he?
beneath the table,
Hawthorne
his
hesitated.
hand was clenched
He
into
knew
a
how
fist.
dangerous this
He
question
could
was.
feel the vibration
He's
of his
struggling.
phone in his pocket.
The shop is open.
It had buzzed 3
He's working
times during
18-hour
the
days.
appetizer course.
He fixed the roof
He knew who
himself
it was.
when it leaked.
The bank.
He refused
The
a loan
CFO.
from his father's
The numbers were not
associates last
aligning
week.
as smoothly as
He's
he
proud,
had told the
Elena.
investors.
He's doing it
The
all on his
liquidity
own.
issue was not
A
gone.
smile touched
It was
Elena's
merely
lips,
hiding,
sad and proud,
waiting for him to look
He always
away.
was stubborn.
Midway through the
He
main
asks about
course,
you.
the phone
Hawthorne
buzzed
added
again.
softly.
Persistent.
Not directly.
Richard excused
But I hear
himself.
things. Standing
He tells
up abruptly.
clients he's waiting for
I must
a
take this,
specific
he
part.
said.
A rare
Important
spring.
business. He says
He
it
walked
takes
out
time
of the
to find
dining
the right
room into
fit.
the hallway.
Elena looked
noise
down
of
at
her
her
party
hands.
fading behind
They were
him.
manicured now.
He answered the
smooth,
call,
but
his
she
voice a
remembered
harsh
the oil
whisper.
stains. The
I told you
calluses
not
from
to
the
call me
tools.
during dinner.
Tell me he's eating.
Sir, the voice on
He's
the other
alive,
end was
Hawthorne
frantic.
said. But he's
It is the
lonely.
credit line.
We all are.
The bank is freezing
Elena
the
stood
additional
up
funds.
and walked back to the window.
They say there are
The city
irregularities
lights
in
twinkled like
collateral.
distant stars.
They want a meeting.
I can't go
Tomorrow.
back yet, Hawthorne.
Richard leaned
Not
against
until
the
the
wall,
merger is
the
complete.
cold stone seeping
Not
through
until
his
his father understands
Irregularities?
that power isn't inherited.
What irregularities?
It's earned. I signed those
If I go
papers
back
myself.
now,
Lucas
they
will
say the
always
ownership
wonder if he
structure of the
succeeded
property
because of
used
me.
as collateral
He needs to
is
know he can stand
contested.
alone. There is a
And when
lien
he knows
we did
the
not
truth,
see.
Richard
Hawthorne
closed
asked,
his eyes.
when he knows you
A
own
lien
the ground he was
on his
standing
mansion.
on,
Impossible.
then he'll know I didn't save
He
him.
owned it outright,
Elena said.
He had
her
paid
voice
for it
firm.
in cash years
I
ago.
just cleared the path.
Fix it, he hissed.
He walked it.
I do not care
She turned
how.
back to the desk.
Just fix it.
There's the
I cannot
industry
have this
summit next
leaking.
week.
There was a
The
pause.
Sterlings will be there.
Sir, it is not
They're
just
desperate
a
for
glitch.
new investors.
It looks like someone bought
They don't
the
know
debt.
that the primary
Someone
investor
anonymous.
is me.
Richard's
Are you
heart
attending?
skipped a beat.
Yes,
Elena
anonymous.
said.
It's
Who?
time. We do not
The
know
week
yet.
leading up to the
But
summit
they have the
was
power
a
to
blur
call the
of
loan.
preparations.
If they do,
Elena Elena chose her
cut the
attire
call
carefully. He
Not
stood
the
in the
humble
hallway,
dress of the past,
the silence of the house,
not the
pressing
overly
against
aggressive
his
power
ears.
suit of the
The
boardroom.
party continued behind
Something
the doors,
elegant,
oblivious.
something that commanded
standing
respect
on a
without
precipice,
shouting,
and the ground
She
was
practiced her
crumbling.
speech in the mirror.
He took a deep
watching
breath,
her own
composing
eyes.
his face.
She needed to
He
be
could not
cold
show
enough
weakness.
to be taken seriously.
Not tonight,
but warm
He
enough
walked
to be
back
trusted.
into the dining room.
She needed to be
smiling
the air they
broadly.
needed.
Apologies,
not the girl
he
they
announced.
rejected.
A minor
On the morning of
logistical
the summit,
issue.
the air
Resolved.
was crisp.
He sat
The venue
down
was a
and poured
grand
himself
hotel
more
ballroom.
wine.
He
Filled
drank
with the
deeply,
elite of the
the
business
liquid
world.
burning his throat.
Chandeliers
He looked
cast
around
a
the
warm
table
glow
at the
over
smiling
crowd.
faces.
Waiters
They were
circulated
vultures,
with champagne,
waiting for a sign of
Elena
blood.
arrived late.
He would not give it to
letting
them.
the buzz of the room
He laughed at a
build
joke
before
he did
her
not
entrance.
hear.
He nodded
stood
at
in the
comments
shadows
he did
of the
not
balcony,
process.
overlooking the
He was
floor.
acting. She
Playing
saw
the
them
role
immediately.
of the invincible
Arthur
billionaire.
and Margaret Sterling
But inside,
stood near
the
the
cold
center,
seed of doubt had
surrounded
taken
by a
root.
group of
Who
potential
bought the debt?
investors. The question
They
looked
looked older
older
than
than
she
she remembered.
It had to be a
The
competitor.
arrogance was still there.
A rival
but it was
company
frayed
trying
at
to
the
weaken him
edges.
before the merger.
Arthur's suit was
But who?
slightly less
He
pristine.
scanned the faces at
Margaret's
the table.
smile didn't reach
Julian?
her eyes. No, they were hunting.
Mrs. Gable?
And then she saw
Unlikely.
him.
Lucas.
It was someone outside.
He stood slightly
Someone
apart
hidden
from his parents.
He felt a sudden
holding a glass
urge
of
to look
water.
at the empty chair
He looked
beside
tired.
him. His
For a
suit
fleeting
was the same
second,
one he had
he
wondered
warned
if
if Eleanor
months
knew.
ago. She
But
had
he
always
wore it
been
with
good
a
with
new
numbers.
kind of dignity.
She had warned
He
him
wasn't
about the cash
slouching.
flow. He wasn't
He pushed
hiding.
the thought away.
He was listening.
She was nobody.
He was learning.
She was gone.
Elena's heart
She had no
hammered
power
against her ribs.
She was living off
It
his
took
stipend,
every ounce of her willpower
probably crying
not to
in
run
some
down the
small
stairs and throw her
He had to
arms
believe
around
that.
him. If he
She
believed
gripped the
otherwise,
railing, her knuckles
the
white.
foundation of his reality
Not yet,
would
she
shatter.
told herself.
The dinner ended
Watch.
late. A man
The guests
beside her on the
departed with
balcony cleared
handshakes
his
and
throat.
promises of future
Impressive
deals.
turnout, isn't it?
Richard stood at
Everyone
the
is
door,
waiting for
smiling
the
until his
speaker.
cheeks ached.
The mysterious
When
head
the
of
last
Vance
car
Global.
drove away,
No one
the
has seen
silence
her in
rushed
public
back
before.
in. Heavier
Elena
than
didn't
before.
look at him.
He locked the door and
Anticipation is
leaned
a
against
powerful
it,
tool.
closing his eyes.
They say she's ruthless.
The house was dark.
The man continued.
The staff had
Bought out
retired.
half the district's
He was
suppliers
alone.
overnight.
He walked into the
Some
dining
say
room.
she's going to
The
announce
table
a
was a
merger
mess
with
of
Sterling
leftover
today.
food and empty
Save
glasses.
them from bankruptcy.
The empty chair
Elena
was still
finally
there.
looked at him.
He walked
Or
over
maybe
to
she's
it
going to
and
teach
ran
them
his
how to
hand
save
over
themselves.
The velvet
She
was
checked her
cool.
watch.
He remembered
It was
the
time
night
she
left.
She adjusted
The
her
necklace
jacket,
on the banister.
took a deep breath.
He had
and
put it in
stepped
the
out of
safe,
shadows.
but he had not worn it.
She walked down the
It
grand
felt
staircase.
cursed.
Her
He
heels
walked to the
clicking
banister
rhythmically
and looked
on
down
the
at the
marble.
foyer. The
It
sound
was
was
subtle,
shadowed and vast,
but heads began to
he
turn.
felt small. There was a
He poured
presence
a drink
in the
from
room
the
that
sideboard
shifted the
and
atmosphere.
walked into the living room.
People stopped talking.
He sat on the sofa.
Whispers
the
rippled
same
through
one
the
where he
crowd.
had sat the night
Who
she
is that?
left.
Is that
He took
her?
a sip and looked
The Vance
around.
heir?
The
Elena
portraits
kept
on the
her eyes
walls
forward.
seemed to judge him.
She didn't look at
The
the
shadows
Sterlings.
seemed to move.
She didn't look
He
at
turned on the
Lucas.
television.
She walked
filling
toward
the room
the
with
stage.
noise.
As she ascended
news
the
channel,
steps, she
the
felt
anchor
the
was
weight of the
talking
moment.
about market volatility.
This was the culmination
about
of months
hidden
of
assets,
sleepless nights,
about
of
shell
loneliness,
companies,
of strategic
Richard turned it
maneuvering.
off.
She
He
reached
drank
the
more.
podium. He thought
The
about the
microphone
bank
was
call.
adjusted for her
Aline.
height. She
Anonymous.
looked out at the sea of
He
faces.
stood up and began to
She
pace.
saw Arthur Sterling
He needed to
stiffen.
find out.
She saw
who it
Margaret's
was.
eyes widen
He needed
slightly.
to crush them.
And she saw
He walked
Lucas.
to his study and
He was
opened
staring
his
at
laptop.
her. His glass
He
halfway
logged into
to
the
his
secure
mouth.
server.
He didn't
typing
recognize her
furiously.
at first.
He searched
The
for
woman
recent
on the
property
stage was
records.
confident.
He
powerful,
searched for debt
radiant.
acquisitions.
She was not
Nothing
the girl
came up.
who had washed
It
dishes
was buried
in A.
deep.
Small
He slammed the
apartment.
laptop shut.
But then her eyes met
Frustration
his.
boiled in his
Just
chest.
for a second.
He was
And she
Richard
saw the
Sterling.
flicker of recognition.
He did not lose.
The confusion.
He did not get
The hope.
outmaneuvered. Good evening.
Especially not by
Elena
ghosts.
said, her voice
He walked back
amplifying
out
through
into the
hallway.
I
He
am
looked at
Elena
the
Vance.
staircase.
Thank you
He
for
remembered
coming.
her walking up
The
those
room was
steps with her
silent.
suitcase.
She paused,
Calm,
letting her name
dignified.
settle.
She
No
saw
tears.
Arthur lean toward
Why had she
Margaret,
not cried?
whispering urgently.
Why had she not begged?
They knew the name
It
now.
haunted him. They knew the
A
power
woman
it
with
held.
nothing to lose.
We are
should have
gathered
begged.
here to discuss
Unless
the
she
future
did
of
not
our
have
industry.
nothing to lose. Elena
The
continued.
thought surfaced again.
A future built on
unbidden.
innovation,
He shook his head.
resilience,
No.
and integrity.
She was nothing.
Too often we
He had
rely on
checked.
legacy.
He had
We
controlled
rely on
everything.
names. He walked
But
up
names
the
are just
stairs,
labels.
his footsteps heavy.
Value is created
He went
by
into the
action.
bedroom.
She
The
glanced
bed was
down
made
at her
perfectly,
notes.
though she
The
didn't
other
need
side
them.
was empty.
Tonight,
Vance
lay
Global
down and
is
stared at
announcing
the
a
new
ceiling.
initiative. The darkness
A partnership
pressed down
program
on him.
for
He
independent
tried to
retailers.
sleep, but his
We
mind
believe in
raced.
supporting those
Who
who
bought the
build
debt?
with their hands.
Who was watching
Who
him?
fix what is broken.
He rolled over
Who create
and looked at
value
the
from
empty
nothing.
pillow.
He
He
reached
looked
out
at
his
his hand,
hand,
Lucas again,
expecting to feel
He had
warmth,
lowered his
but
glass,
found only cold
He was standing
sheets.
taller now.
He pulled his
He
hand
understood.
back.
He
This
felt
wasn't just a
profound
business
loneliness,
announcement.
sharp and
It was a
sudden.
message.
He had wanted
I see
space.
you. I
He had
believe
wanted
in you.
freedom. We will
But this
not
was
be
not
acquiring
freedom.
Sterling Industries.
This was isolation.
Elena said.
He had
voice
built a
clear.
fortress to keep
He will
the
be
world
offering
out.
them a line of
And
credit.
now he was trapped
conditional
inside
on
it.
restructuring.
He closed his
Conditional
eyes,
on
trying to
merit.
force sleep.
A murmur
But
went
the
through
silence
the
of the
crowd.
house whispered
Arthur
to him.
Sterling looked pale.
It sounded like her name.
He had expected a takeover.
Miles away in the
He had
penthouse.
expected destruction.
Eleanor sat at her
Instead,
desk.
he was being
The city
offered a
lights
lifeline,
twinkled below,
but one that came
indifferent
with
to the
strings.
drama
He
strings that demanded change. Her laptop screen glowed with a report from Arthur. The applause began, slow at first, then roaring. The bank had been notified. She didn't smile. The pressure was applied. She nodded politely and walked off the stage. She read the email, her face calm. She didn't stop for interviews. She did not smile. She didn't stop not about joy. It was about correction. Toward the exit. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Arthur. She knew the questions would proceed to phase 2. The secret was out. Prepare the offer. The game had changed. She set the phone down. She pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the mansion cool night air of the hotel terrace. But she knew it was there. She walked to the railing. Richard was there, looking out at the city. She knew he was awake. She heard pacing, the door open, wondering who was coming for him. Footsteps. She stood up and walked to the window. Then faster. She placed her hand on the glass. The voice broke her heart. Soon, she thought. She turned around. Not with anger. Lucas stood not with there, hate, breathing heavily, with justice, as if he had treated her as a nobody from the ballroom. He had treated her home as an asset, searching her face. He had treated their life to reconcile the woman in the power. Now he would learn the value of what he had discarded. You,
She
he
turned
whispered.
away from the window.
It was you.
And went to bed.
The investor.
She slept
The
soundly.
Vance heir.
The sleep of
Elena
someone
nodded.
who knows exactly.
She didn't
where
try
they're
to
going.
hide it anymore.
Richard tossed
Yes.
and turned.
All this time,
The sleep of holding
Lucas
a mug
said,
of
his
coffee
voice
that had
trembling
long
with
gone
emotion.
cold.
You knew.
Below her,
You knew
the city
everything.
moved with a rhythm
And you let
she
me-
understood
you let
better
me
than the
struggle.
silence of the mansion.
I let you stand.
Here, she was
Elena
not a
corrected
decoration.
gently.
She was
I
not a
couldn't give you
silent
the
partner.
answer, Lucas.
She was the
You had
architect.
to find it yourself.
The phone on her desk
If I had
buzzed,
told you,
breaking the
You
quiet.
would have never known if
It
you
was
were
not
strong
Richard.
enough.
He had called
Lucas
12
took a
times
step
since
closer,
dawn,
but
the
she had
anger
let
was
every
there,
call go
but
to
it was mixed with
voicemail.
awe. This was
You
Victor
saved her
Hale,
family,
her oldest
You saved
friend
the shop.
and the managing
You
partner
saved
of
me.
Hale Ventures.
I saved the business.
Come in,
Elena
she
said,
said, turning
You
from the
saved
window
yourself.
as the door opened.
You refused your
Victor
father's
walked
help.
in.
You
A
worked
tall man
18-hour
with silver
days.
hair.
You
and
kept
a
your
suit
integrity.
that spoke of old
That was
money
you,
and
Lucas.
older wisdom.
Not me.
He carried a leather
Lucas
folder
shook his
under his
head.
arm, tears
He
welling
looked at
in his
her,
eyes.
really looked at her.
Why didn't you tell
Without
me?
the assessing
Why did
glare
you leave?
Richard used to measure
Because I
value.
needed you to know
You
that
look
I wasn't
rested,
leaving
Eleanor,
you, he said,
Elena
placing
said,
the
her
folder
voice
on her
cracking.
desk. I was
Though I
leaving
know
the
you haven't been
situation.
sleeping much.
I needed to become
Eleanor
someone who
smiled,
could stand
a
beside
tired but
you
genuine
without
expression.
overshadowing you. Sleep is
I needed to
overrated
be your
when
equal,
justice is on
not
the
your
horizon.
savior.
Victor
Not your
chuckled
burden.
softly.
Lucas
pulling out a
closed the
chair.
distance between them.
Justice. He reached
A heavy
out,
word.
his hand hovering
Are you
near
sure
her
about
face,
this path?
afraid she might
Once we acquire
disappear.
the debt fully,
You're still
there
Elena.
is no turning back.
I am, she
Richard
whispered.
will lose the property.
And I'm still yours.
It will be public.
If you'll have me.
Eleanor walked
Lucas
to her
let out a
desk and
sob,
sat down,
a sound of pure
running her
relief,
hand over
and
the
pulled her
smooth
into his
wood.
arms.
It was her desk.
He held her tightly,
bought with her own first
as if he were
dividend
afraid
check.
the wind would blow
I am
her
sure,
away.
Victor.
Elena
He did not
buried
see
her
me
face
as a
in her
partner.
shoulder.
He saw me
breathing
as
in
an
the scent of
accessory.
him.
He
was
thought
the
he
same
could
scarred
discard
me
me
without
without
consequence.
soap and wooden home.
He thought my value
I
was
hated
tied
you,
to his name.
he whispered into
She
her
opened
hair.
the folder Victor had
For a while.
brought.
I hated that
Inside
you
were the
left.
financial structures
But I never
of
stopped
three separate
loving you.
holding companies.
I know.
All
Elena
owned
said,
by her.
holding him just as
all
tight.
profitable.
I never
All
stopped
unknown
either.
to Richard
They
Sterling.
stood on the terrace.
People think I
wrapped
married
in each
into
other,
power,
while
she
the party
continued, her
continued
voice
inside.
steadied.
But
The
they
world
forget
was
I
still
had power
turning.
before I ever
The
said I
Sterlings
do.
were still inside.
I built Vance
grappling
Consulting
with a
from
new
a single
reality.
room in
The
a
market
shared
would still
office.
fluctuate tomorrow.
I negotiated the
but
deal
in this
that
moment,
saved his
none of that
company in
mattered.
2015.
The secret was out,
and he took the
The
credit.
barrier was gone.
I stayed silent
They were no
because
longer
I
the
loved
heir
him,
and the watchmaker.
because I thought his success
They were
was
just
our
two
success.
people who had found their way
Victor
back
leaned
to
forward,
each other,
his
through the
expression
dark.
serious.
Elena pulled
And
back
now-
slightly to
now
look
I
at him.
realize that love
It's going
without
to be
respect
hard.
is just
Your
servitude.
father, he won't
Eleanor
like this.
replied.
Let
She
him
picked
not
up a
like
pen,
it,
Lucas
twirling
said,
it
wiping
between
his
her
eyes.
fingers. I don't
He
work
kicked
for
me
him
out as a
anymore.
nobody.
I work for
He told
us.
me I had no prospects,
Elena
no
smiled.
income.
A genuine
He believes
smile
I am
that reached her
surviving on
eyes
a
for the first
stipend.
time in months.
Victor shook his head.
Then let's go home.
A look of disdain
to the
crossing
apartment.
his face.
Lucas asked.
He is a fool.
No,
A brilliant
Elena
businessman,
said, taking his hand,
but a fool when it
to
comes
the shop.
people.
We have
He
work to do.
underestimated the woman
And then
who balanced
maybe we
his
can look
books
for a
when
new
he was
place.
too arrogant to
Somewhere
look at the
with a bigger
details.
window. Eleanor looked
Lucas
out the
laughed,
window,
a
a
sound
sound
of pure joy.
I do not want to destroy him, Victor.
Yeah, we can do that.
I want to reclaim
They
what is
walked
mine.
back toward the entrance.
The house was
hand
never
in
just
hand.
his. The doorman
chose the
opened
land.
the door for them.
I designed the
As
gardens.
they stepped back into the
I
light,
made it a home.
Elena looked
He made
back
it a
at the
showroom.
terrace one last
There was a
time.
knock on the door.
The shadows were
Eleanor's
gone.
assistant
The
peeked.
secrets were gone.
In.
All
Ms.
that was
Vance,
left,
her head
the board is
slightly,
waiting for
and
the
saw
quarterly
Lucas
review.
sleeping beside her.
And Mr. Sterling
His
is
breathing
online
was steady.
again. His face
He says
relaxed
it is
in
an
a way
emergency.
she hadn't seen
Eleanor
since
did
before
not
the
flinch.
ultimatum. Let
The
the
events
board
of the
wait 5
previous
minutes
night felt like a dream.
and put Mr. Sterling
The
through to
revelation,
voicemail.
though.
The
Leaned
assistant
forward.
nodded and
The
closed
technical
door.
assessment I
Victor
just
raised an
completed shows a
eyebrow.
40%
You are blocking his
reduction in
calls.
upgrade costs.
He will come
using
here.
a modular
He will
approach.
find out where you are.
That's not
Let
manipulation.
him, Eleanor said.
That's engineering.
Let him see the name
I've
on
worked
the
the
building.
floor.
Let
I
him
know
see
the
the
machines.
office.
This
Let him
plan
realize
works.
that the woman he
The
threw out
shareholders
runs a
looked at
company
Lucas.
that rivals his own.
They knew him as the
It
son
is
who
time
walked
for the
away.
truth to surface.
Seeing him here,
Victor opened his own
advocating for
tablet.
Elena's plan,
The debt
shifted
acquisition
the
is ready.
dynamic.
We have
It
enough
wasn't just an
capital to buy
outsider
the remaining
imposing
lien
change.
from the bank.
It was an
Once
insider
we hold the debt,
validating it.
we control
Henderson
the
looked
collateral.
between them.
The mansion.
You stand together
Eleanor
on
nodded.
this?
Do
We
it.
stand together,
But do not use
Elena
my
said
name.
firmly.
Use the
Or
shell
we all
company.
fall separately.
Orion
The
Holdings.
choice is yours.
I want him to know
There was a
it is
long
me only
pause.
when I stand on
Finally,
his doorstep.
Henderson nodded
Victor
slowly.
smiled, a sharp,
Very well, approving look.
We will approve
Psychological
the
warfare.
As they left the room,
he stood
Elena
up to
let
leave.
out a breath she had
Just
been
be careful,
holding.
Eleanor.
That was close,
He is cornered.
she admitted.
Cornered
You were
animals
brilliant,
are dangerous,
Lucas said.
He will not
But you
hurt
didn't
me,
have to do it
Eleanor
alone.
said confidently.
I'm learning that.
He is
she
too
said.
in love with his own
Over the
image
next
to
few
sustain
weeks,
it with violence.
the rhythm of their life
He will try to
settled into a new
negotiate.
pattern.
He will try to
They worked
charm.
long days.
He will try to
often
guilt.
late into the night.
And I will be ready.
Elena's
After
reputation
Victor left,
in the market
Eleanor
solidified.
turned to her computer.
She wasn't just the
She
heir.
opened a file labeled
She was the
Memories.
architect of the turnaround.
It contained photos.
Articles
from
were
before
written
Richard.
about her strategic
Her graduation.
genius.
Her first
They praised her
office.
vision, her grit.
Her team celebrating
They didn't know
a major
about the
win.
sleepless nights.
She had hidden
the
these
doubts,
away when she
the
married
tears
him,
shed in the car,
packing
on the way
them
to
in
the
boxes
office.
in the attic of
But
the
Lucas
mansion.
knew. Richard
One
had
evening,
never gone to
they
the
stayed
attic.
late at the office.
He never cared about
The
her
city
past.
lights twinkled below.
He only cared about her
Elena
present
was
utility.
reviewing a final report.
She touched the
on
screen.
Sterling merger.
I am coming back.
It was complete.
She whispered to
The
the
company
images.
was saved,
not as your
restructured,
wife,
and poised for
as your
growth.
landlord. She
The
closed
irony
the
was
folder
bitter,
and leaned
but
back in her
necessary.
chair. Meanwhile,
It's done,
across the
she
city,
said.
Richard paced his
Lucas
study.
looked up from his own
The
work.
phone in his hand
What
felt
happens
like a brick.
now?
He had
Now,
tried Eleanor
Elena
again.
said. standing up and walking to the window.
He had tried her lawyer.
We decide what
No
we
comment.
want.
The
He had
company
tried to
is
visit
stable.
her last known
I don't need
address,
to be here
but
18
the building
hours
was
a day
secure,
anymore.
guarded
Do you
by
wanna
men
step
who
back?
did not recognize
Lucas
him as
asked,
someone with
coming to
authority.
stand beside her.
He felt a rising
I want to
panic
live,
that he could
Elena
not
said.
suppress.
I spent
The
so
bank
much
had called
time
again.
building a future
The debt
that I
holder was
forgot to be
demanding a
present
meeting
in the present.
They wanted to
I want to
discuss
fix watches
restructuring.
again.
Restructuring
dinner.
meant losing control.
I want to walk in the park.
He slammed the
without
phone
checking
down.
my phone.
Who are they?
Lucas smiled.
He shouted at the empty
I can arrange
room.
that.
The echo
The shop
mocked
is
him.
still there.
He walked
It's
to the
quiet
window,
without you,
looking
though.
out at the city.
It won't be anymore.
Somewhere out there,
Elena promised.
Eleanor was hiding.
She turned to
He was
face
sure
him.
of it.
But
She
I
was
need you to
probably
understand
crying,
something.
waiting for him
I will
to call
always
her
have
back.
this power. That was the
The
narrative
money
he
he
clung
clung
to.
to.
If
It's
she was
part of me
powerful,
now.
if she
I
was
can't give
behind
it
this,
back.
it meant he had
Will
been
that
blind.
bother you?
It meant
Lucas
he had
thought for
lost
a
not
moment.
just a wife.
He looked
but a
out at the
rival.
city, then
He
back
could
at
not
her.
accept that. It bothered me
poured
when
a
it was
drink,
a secret, though it was only
bothered
10 in
me
the
when I
morning.
felt powerless.
His hand shook,
But
as
now
he lifted the
it's
glass.
just a tool.
He thought about
Like
the
a
night
hammer.
she left.
It depends on
the
who
calmness
holds it.
in her eyes.
You hold it with care.
He had mistaken it
So
for
no, it doesn't
resignation.
bother me.
Now he
As
wondered
long
if
as
it
we
was
hold it
preparation.
together.
No,
Elena
he
felt
muttered
a
to
tear
himself.
slip down her cheek.
She is nothing.
She wiped it
She
away
is nobody.
quickly.
He
You have
repeated
no
the
idea
words
how
like a
much I
mantra,
needed to hear
trying
that.
to make them true.
I think I do.
But the doubt was
Lucas
a
said,
weed, pulling her
growing
into a
fast
hug.
in the cracks of
Because
his
I needed to
confidence.
say it. He
They
sat
stayed
down at
like
his
that
desk
for a
and
while,
opened his laptop.
watching the city
He
breathe
began to
below
search.
them.
The
Vance.
rise was complete.
Eleanor Vance.
Not just the rise
He
of
typed the
Elena
name
Vance
into
in
the
the business
market,
database,
but the rise
he
of their
expected to see
partnership.
nothing. They had
Maybe a
navigated
few
the
charity
storm,
donations,
survived the separation.
Instead, screen
and
after
emerged
screen
stronger.
of results popped up.
The market respected
Vance
Elena
Consulting,
now, not
CEO,
because of her name,
Eleanor Vance,
but because of her work.
net worth.
And Lucas
Estimated
respected
in
her
the
not
hundreds of
because of her
millions.
power,
Board
but
member,
because of her heart.
3 tech startups.
The next morning,
Partner,
Elena made
Hale
a decision.
Ventures.
She
Richard
called
stopped
Hawthorne.
breathing for a moment.
I'm stepping down as CEO.
The screen seemed
she
to
said.
blur.
Ms.
He
Vance
scrolled down.
Hawthorne
There was a
sounded
photo
shocked.
of her at a conference.
The stock will plummet.
Speaking at a podium.
No, it won't. She
Elena
looked
said.
confident.
Powerful,
I'm appointing a board of
wearing
directors.
a suit that commanded
I'm
attention.
staying as chairman.
She was not the
I want to
quiet
focus
woman
on
in the
strategy,
emerald dress.
not operations.
She was a leader,
and I want to
He
reopen
felt
the
the
watch
floor
shop
tilt
as a
beneath him.
subsidiary. All those years,
A training ground for
all those
engineers.
times she asked about the
That's
business.
unconventional.
She wasn't
Hawthorne
being
noted.
nosy. It's
She was
personal,
analyzing.
Elena said. She knew more
Make
than
it
he
happen.
thought.
She
She
hung
had been
up and
watching
looked
him
at
while he
Lucas.
ignored her. I'm coming
He
back to
stood
the
up,
shop, knocking his chair
part-time.
over.
The
You
noise
okay with
crashed
that?
through the silent
Lucas
house.
laughed, a
He
sound
grabbed
of
his
pure
keys.
relief. He
I
had
think
to
I
see
can
her.
manage.
He had to
They
confront
left the
her.
office together.
If she had money,
Not
if
in
she
the
had
black
power,
car.
why did
but
she
walking
leave?
to the subway station?
Why did she let
like
him kick her
everyone
out?
else?
It made no
They
sense.
blended into the crowd.
Unless she wanted him
Two
to.
faces among
Unless
many.
this was a trap.
But as they walked,
He ran to
Elena
the
held
garage,
her head high.
getting into his sports
She had
car.
conquered the world of
He
giants.
sped out of the driveway,
but she was
tires
returning to the
screeching.
world of small
He
things.
drove to the Vance Tower.
She had proven she could
He had
be
seen
the
the
air they
name on the
needed,
building in the
but
search
more
results.
importantly, she
He
had
parked
proven she could be
haphazardly
the
in the
woman
lobby
she wanted to
drop-off
be.
zone and
The
stormed
suspense of the
inside.
secret was gone.
The security guard
The drama
stepped
of
in
the
front of
conflict
him.
was resolved.
Can I help you, sir?
But the story
I
wasn't
need to see
over.
Eleanor Vance.
It was just
Richard
entering
demanded.
a new chapter.
She is my wife.
One written not in
the guard
boardrooms
checked
or
the
mansions.
list. Ms.
But in
Vance
the
is
quiet
in a meeting.
moments of a life
Do you have an
built on
appointment?
truth.
I don't
As
need
they
an
descended
appointment.
into the subway
Richard
station,
shouted, hand in
Tell
hand.
her Richard Sterling is
Elena
here.
knew that no matter
The guard
what challenges
pressed his
came
earpiece.
next, a
They
moment
would
later,
face them
he
with
looked
the
back
same
at
resilience
Richard.
that had
Ms.
in the
Vance
modest
says she will
coat
see you,
controlled a
but
significant
only for
portion
10
of
minutes.
the market they worked in.
Floor 40. They smiled
Richard
at each
took
other.
the elevator
a
up,
private
his heart
secret
pounding.
shared in a public
The
space.
doors opened to a
But
sleek
while their
reception
world was
area.
stabilizing,
The logo on the
another
wall
world,
was AV,
one
sharp
built
and
on
modern.
glass and arrogance.
Eleanor was
beginning
not
to
there.
crack. Her assistant
Miles
guided
away,
him to a conference
in the
room.
sterile silence
Wait
of the
here.
Sterling Industries
Richard paced the
executive
room.
office.
10
The
minutes.
air was thick with
She was
tension.
playing games.
Arthur Sterling
The door
stood by the
opened.
window.
Eleanor walked
looking out
in.
at the same
She
skyline
was not wearing
Elena
a gown.
had just admired.
She was wearing a
But where
tailored
she saw
navy
opportunity,
suit.
her hair
He saw a
pulled
threat.
back.
The
She
lights
carried
of
a
the city
tablet.
seemed to be
She
mocking
looked like
him,
a CEO,
twinkling like
Richard
eyes
stared at
watching
her.
his failure.
You.
On
You
his
own this
desk lay a
building?
thick report.
Eleanor
bound in
sat
blue
at the
leather.
head of the table.
The Vance Global
She
logo
did not offer
was
him a
embossed
seat.
on the cover.
I do.
It was the
Sit down, Richard.
restructuring plan.
We have little time.
The lifeline. He sat,
But to Arthur,
feeling
it
small
felt like
in
a
the
death
high-back
warrant.
chair. Margaret
Why?
sat on the
He
leather
asked, his
sofa
voice
in the
rough.
corner of the room.
Why did you hide
Her
this?
posture rigid.
Why did you let me?
She held a
treat
cup
you
of
like
tea
that
that had
gone cold
Eleanor
20
placed her
minutes
tablet
ago.
on the table.
She hadn't taken a
because
sip.
you needed to feel big.
The silence
Richard.
between them was
and I was
heavy,
willing to make myself
laden with the
small
unspoken
to let you feel that
acknowledgement
way.
of their diminished
I thought it was
status.
love.
They were
I
no
was
longer
wrong.
the masters
It
of
was
this
enabling.
domain.
Richard
They were
leaned
tenants.
forward.
Have
So
you
this
read the
is
terms?
revenge?
Arthur
You bought the
asked,
debt to
his
hurt
voice
me?
low.
No,
lacking the
Eleanor
commanding
said
boom
calmly.
it once had.
I bought the debt
You
to
didn't turn
protect
around.
my investment.
I scanned them.
The mansion is an
Margaret
asset.
replied, her voice
It was
tight.
mismanaged.
They retained
I am
voting
correcting
control
the error.
on all major
You
decisions.
kicked me out as a nobody, Richard.
We are consultants.
You told me I had
in our
nothing.
own company.
I am just proving
Arthur
you wrong.
turned slowly.
She stood up.
His face looked
Your
older
10
than
minutes
it had
are
a year
up.
ago.
I have a
The
board
lines
meeting.
around his mouth
Richard
were deeper,
stood as well,
etched by months of
desperation
sleepless
creeping
nights
into his eyes,
and the constant fear
Eleanor,
of the phone
please.
ringing with
We
bad
can work
news.
this out.
Consultants,
Come
he
home.
repeated,
We can fix
the
the
word
marriage.
tasting bitter.
I didn't mean.
We built this empire.
Eleanor walked to the
My
door,
father
and his
she
father
paused and
before
looked
him.
back. And now we are advisors to a girl who fixes watches. And your consequences. She is not just a girl who fixes watches, Arthur. My assistant will show you out, though she hated admitting She walked away. You saw the summit clicking on the floor. You saw the numbers. Richard stood alone. She saved us from liquidation. The silence was calling in the loans. He looked at the empty chairs she had vacated. We had dignity. He looked at the logo on the wall. Snapped. He realized then that he had not just slamming his hand down on the report. He had lost an equal. We had legacy, and she was no longer on his side. Do you think the shareholders respect us now? The city noise hitting the market sees us as leaders? He got into his car and sat as survivors, gripping the steering wheel. There is a difference. The mansion felt further away and walked over to him. He had thought he was placed a hand on his arm, but he had been walking into a web woven by the woman. She understood his pain. It was revelation settled in his chest. For decades, cold. Their name had opened. She was not coming back to save him. It was the reason she was coming back to take what was hers. The decline wasn't just financial. He had no power to stop her. It was existential. The engine started. They were becoming ghosts in their own machine. She just mocked the chaos. Lucas is happy. The image of Eleanor standing at the head of that conference table was burned into his retina. He looks alive. She had not looked like the woman beside her. Quietly poured his coffee for 15 years. Lucas is bewitched. She had looked like a commander, pouring himself a drink from the wheel until his knuckles turned white. His hand shook slightly under the pressure. He thinks this is a partnership. He had told himself he was free. He doesn't see that he had told merely the consort to the queen. But as he shifted the car into drive, the weight on his chest felt physical. Perhaps he realized the birthright was a cage. He drove back to Sterling Industries on autopilot. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. The skyscraper that housed his empire loomed ahead. We pushed him away. A monument of glass and steel that he had built with sheer will. We thought we were protecting the company. Or so he had thought. Instead, we nearly destroyed it. As he pulled into the private executive entrance, maybe this is the correction we needed. He noticed the security guards exchanging Arthur took a sip of the whiskey as he passed. The burn doing little to stand at attention, not in his stomach. Now their postures were slumped. Is that what you call this humiliation? I walk into the boardroom traveled faster than memos, and I see Henderson looking at me with pity. They knew something was wrong. I would have preferred anger. Twice this week. Anger I could fight. The rumors about the debt were circulating. He walked back to the desk. The CEO had stormed out of a meeting with his estranged wife, through the pages, who each one detailing a change in protocol. Richard took the private elevator to the top new oversight committee. The doors opened directly into his office suite. The receptionist, usually smiling, global looked up with a strained expression. They will be in our books, Mr. Sterling. In our files, her voice tight. They will know every secret. The board is on line weakness. They are requesting an immediate briefing. Said. And Mr. Henderson from the Asian Consortium, they know we ignored the market shifts. He says he values status regarding the collateral issues. Arthur slumped into his chair. Richard did not answer. The energy seemed to drain out of him. His jacket still rumpled from the confrontation. I wanted to leave something for his office, he whispered, his voice breaking. He closed the door and leaned against it, closing his eyes. I wanted him to have what I had. The silence here was different from the mansion. A foundation that couldn't be shaken. This silence was expectant. You gave him a name. He was waiting for him to fix something coming to stand behind him. He walked to his desk and pressed the button for line 1. But you tried to give him a chain, he said. Forcing his voice gave him the baritone of authority, and she gave us a chance to keep the name alive. Even if we don't this is about the market fluctuation. Arthur covered his face with his hands. There was a pause on the other end. The fear was still there. Then the voice of the board chairman, old and weary, that one day Elena would decide not just fluctuation. The news about the lien on the primary asset completely, and the Sterling name would become a footnote pulling out of the merger. It was a constant anxiety, a shadow that followed him home. They need a guarantee. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. That woke him at 3 in the morning. Pulling out. The deal happens when she gets bored? It was contingent on stability. His voice muffled by his hands. You told us the property when she decides to sell the assets. You lied to us. We are at her mercy. I did not lie. Richard snapped. Margaret said, defensiveness flaring hot in his chest. Not as owners, technicality. But as leaders. A procedural show her that we know this business better than anyone. You need to handle it faster. The chairman said. Arthur looked up at her. If the merger collapses, the steel in her eyes that he had always admired. We will be forced to vote on leadership. They could not retreat. The line went dead. They could not Richard hide. Stared at the phone. The decline of their absolute power was inevitable. They were threatening to remove but the decline of their relevance slammed the handset down. You think sound echoed in the large office? Arthur asked. He walked to the window, company, looking out at the city. She didn't see the Vance Tower in the distance. She kept Lucas. She had done wants this to work. She hadn't just bought the debt. Tolerate incompetence. She had triggered the clause that flagged the asset. Arthur nodded slowly. She had known exactly how the market would react. The sound of the cover she had known the investors were skittish. Then we had used his own arrogance. We swallow our pride. He turned back to his desk and pressed line 2. Margaret warned. Henderson, he said. The staff knows. Richard, the voice on the other end was polite. We will be watched. We cannot proceed. Arthur said, our auditors found the lien. He changes every tie. A reflex of his new collateral package within 48 hours. Let them see that, or Sterling knows how to survive. 48 hours? Even in the shadow of a Richard shouted. That is impossible. To the door and opened it. I need time to arrange outside the financing. Was dim. The staff you should have secured your assets before announcing the merger. But tomorrow they would be back, Henderson replied. And the work would begin. You moved too fast. Not the work of expansion. You were impulsive. But the work of preservation. The line went dead. The work of humility. Richard stood alone in the center of the room. As they left the building, the night air conditioning hummed. Arthur looked up at the Vance Global Tower. He felt sweat trickling down his back. It stood taller than their own building. He needed capital. It was a monument to the new order, but he needed the merger to get the capital. He felt a pang of jealousy, sharp and acute. It was a circle with no exit. But he also felt a strange sense of relief, rubbing his temples. The burden of keeping the ship afloat 15 years was gone. When a crisis like this emerged, he was no longer the captain. There had been a quiet presence in the corner. He was the navigator. Lucas invited us to dinner. She would have been there. Margaret said reading the report to their spotting the loophole. Sunday, suggesting the alternative at their new place. Arthur told him not to announce the idea of sitting at their table in their home. She would have told him to calm the board further step down the ladder. Investors. But he looked at Margaret, ignored her, seeing the hope in her eyes. He had silenced her. She wanted the family distraction. Now the silence was costing him millions. Will Elena be there? He looked at the phone again. Arthur asked. He wanted to call her. It's their home. The impulse was physical. Of course she will be. Ache in his hand to pick up the receiver opened the car door and dial the number he knew by heart. But we will not go as beggars. He could not ask for help from the woman he had evicted. Margaret repeated. He could not beg the woman he had called a nobody. It felt different now. He spent the next hour making calls, more about bonds, trying to bluff his way out of the hole. Family. He called bankers. As the car drove away from the corporate tower. They were polite. Arthur looked out the window. Credit lines are under review. The lights of the building seemed to pulse. We need to wait for the audit. He wondered if Elena was there, looking down at them, hoping for a bridge loan. He wondered if she felt triumph. They laughed softly. He hoped not, offering condolences. He hoped she felt only responsibility. By late afternoon, because if she felt triumph, the news hit the public. She was no better than they had been. Sterling Industries. The city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. The ticker on the screen in his office scrolled red numbers, but it was less heavy than before. Each drop felt like a physical blow. The decline of the old empire was complete. He had built this on the rise of the new one had begun, and confidence was evaporating. They were along for the ride. Arthur closed his eyes. CFO knocked and entered without waiting for permission. He thought of the boy he had been. This was new. Before the money. Usually, no one entered without a summons. He missed him. Richard, the man said, this new path would bring him back. The bank has frozen the operating accounts. Quietly. They say the collateral breach triggers a default clause. With her. We cannot make peril on Friday. Margaret looked out the window. Richard stood up. The rain had started scraping loudly against the glass. Fix it, he ordered, his voice shaking. We did. I do not care how. Mistakes are only fatal if we don't learn from them. Sell the vehicles. Arthur nodded. Sell the art. Watch the rain. Just pay the people. Then we learn. We are already liquidating assets, disappearing into the flow of traffic. But it is not enough. The sterling name was still on the building. Orion Holdings, the power behind it had shifted. They could call the whole anxiety of the decline was still there. If they do, we are insolvent. A low hum in the background. Richard gripped the edge of the desk. But it was no longer a panic. It was a motivation. Eleanor's company. Now they had to learn how to stand in a new world. And she hadn't even pulled the trigger yet. A world where money wasn't the only currency. She was waiting. Get out. Respect was earned, not inherited. The CFO left, closing the door softly. Where the woman they disowned held the keys to their future. Richard was alone again. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the carpet. And for now, that had to be enough. The office, the storm had passed, of power, but the landscape was changed forever. He walked to the decanter. They would have to navigate the new terrain carefully. One step trembled so much he spilled one humble decision at a walls themselves. He drank it in one gulp. Their breath. The burn doing Arthur Sterling sat in his office, not in his stomach. The blue report still. He thought about the mansion, but now it was about Eleanor leaving with her rejection letters. He had tried to find an alternative. He had tried to find a way to dilute Elena's control. Now he realized he had signed to bring in another partner. He had removed that the only person who knew how to steer the ship through a storm. But every door he knocked on remained closed. The lights of the city Margaret entered the office without knocking. A habit she had never broken despite the change in their circumstances. She was not panicking. She held a tablet. She was not drinking alone. Her expression grim. She was probably the meeting with Chase Bank is confirmed for tomorrow. He felt a surge of anger, hot and bitter. How could she do this? I've spoken to their liaison, but the word felt hollow. Hesitant is better than no. In years, Arthur replied. He had made sure of that. His temples. He had made sure the headache had been a constant companion. And now she had found a new place. We need the liquidity for the modular He finished upgrade. The drink and set the glass down hard. If we can fund that independently, he needed a strategy. Our reliance on he needed to fight. But for the first time in his life, he did not know the rules of the game. Walking to the window, he was playing chess the same as grandmaster, but the perspective had shifted. They know about his death hold, Arthur. He jumped, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vance Global owns the majority of our outstanding bonds. The screen displayed private number. No bank will touch us without their approval. It could be the bank. We aren't searching for a partner. It could be the board. We're searching for permission. Once. Arthur stood up abruptly, 3 times, pacing the room. He wanted to answer. I built this company. He wanted to hear her voice. I expanded it. I wanted to hear anger, to asking so he could fight back. Former employee for permission. He wanted to hear pity, my own machines, so he could reject it. She is not afraid of what he might hear, Margaret said sharply, turning to face indifference. And she is not asking for permission. The voicemail picked up. She is exercising her rights as the majority silence on the recording. There is no message. Just Arthur stopped pacing. Richard stood looked at his wife, listening to the dial seeing the fatigue in her eyes. It was a message in itself. I need to know if there's any way out. She was waiting. Any other investor. And he was running out of time. Any rumor of someone else out of the office, leaving the lights on. There are rumors. The building was mostly empty now. The cleaners moving. The market is buzzing about the mystery air. He took the elevator down. They say the lobby was dark. They say she's buying up distressed assets. The city air was cool, but he did not. Some say she's clearing. He got in and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Let them talk.
He could not go home.
Rumors are smoke.
The mansion was a reminder of his failure.
I need capital.
The empty chairs,
the next
silent
morning,
halls.
The meeting
the
at Chase
on the
Bank
banister.
was held in a small
He could not go
conference
there.
room far.
He drove
Smaller than the
through
grand
the
halls
streets,
Arthur was
watching
used
the
to.
people on the sidewalks.
The bankers were polite.
Couples
but
walking
their eyes
together.
were guarded.
Friends
They
laughing.
shuffled papers.
People who
avoided
relied on
direct
each
eye
other.
contact and
He had
spoke
pushed
in
away the
circles.
one person
Arthur
who had
felt
relied
the
on
rejection
him,
building
only to
before a
find out
single
she
word
never
was
needed
spoken.
him at all.
Mr.
He
Sterling
finally pulled up
the lead
outside a
banker,
hotel.
Mr.
Reynolds
Reynolds
began.
He would stay
steepling
there
his fingers
just for tonight.
We have reviewed
He
your
checked in
proposal
under a
for the
fake
secondary
name,
line
a
of
habit
credit.
from his early days
It's
when
ambitious.
he wanted to avoid attention.
It's necessary. The room
Arthur
was small,
corrected.
generic.
The upgrade will
He threw
increase
his jacket
efficiency
on the chair
by 30%
and sat on the edge of the bed.
It's a solid investment.
He took out his phone and
We don't
scrolled
doubt
through
the
his
viability
contacts.
of the project.
He stopped at
Reynolds
Eleanor's
said
name.
smoothly.
He hovered
We
his
doubt the
thumb
thumb
over the call button.
Given the current
He
debt
imagined the
structure with Vance
conversation.
Global,
I need
any
help.
new lending would be
Please.
subordinate to
The
their
words
claims.
stuck in his throat.
In the event of
He
default,
could not say them.
they get paid first.
Not yet.
We
Maybe
get
not
nothing.
ever.
We
He locked
locked
the
phone
and tossed
Arthur
it onto
said,
the
his
bedside
voice rising
table.
slightly.
He lay back
We
on
have
the
a plan,
bed,
staring
Plans
at the ceiling.
change.
Reynolds
The crisis
countered.
was not over,
And markets shift.
Tomorrow would be worse.
Our risk assessment
board
team
would
has
meet.
flagged your account
The bank
as
would
high
call,
risk,
and
due to
Eleanor
the
would make her
concentration of
move.
ownership.
He closed
Unless
his eyes,
Vance
but
Global
sleep did
provides
not
a
guarantee.
come.
He lay
He
there in
cannot
the dark,
proceed.
listening
Arthur
to the hum
felt
of the
the
city,
blood drain from his
realizing
face.
that for the first
A
time
guarantee?
in his life,
You want
he was
Elena
truly
Vance to
alone.
guarantee our loan.
And the empire
We
he
want
had
the
built
primary
was crumbling
stakeholder
around
to signal
him,
confidence,
brick by brick,
Reynolds said.
because he had
Without
refused
that,
to listen
our
to
hands
the
are
archetype
tied.
standing right
Arthur
beside
stood
him,
up,
his chair
the night
scraping
stretched
loudly
out,
against the
long
floor.
and unforgiving.
This is
and took a
absurd.
deep breath.
You're telling me
The
I
air
can't
here
borrow
smelled
money
of
against my
cleanliness
own
and
company
possibility.
because another company
Not of
owns
stale
too much
wine
of my
and
debt.
suppressed anger.
I'm telling you,
She walked to the
Reynolds
window,
said, remaining
looking out at
seated,
the
his
waking
voice
world.
calm and unyielding.
Somewhere out there,
that the market
Richard
has
was likely still
consolidated.
awake.
There is
pacing a
only
hotel
one player
room,
with the capital
watching
to
his
back you
empire
now.
crumble.
And that player
She felt
is
no
Vance
joy
Global.
in his pain.
Arthur left
she
the
felt
bank
a profound
without saying
sense of
goodbye.
justice in her
The
own
city air was
stability.
cold.
She
She was
biting
not
through his
destroying
coat.
him out of malice.
Margaret was waiting in the car.
She was protecting herself.
She saw
from
his
the
face
fallout
and
of
knew
his
the answer
negligence.
before he spoke.
There was a difference.
No,
and she
Arthur
held
said,
on to
getting
that
into the back
distinction
seat.
like a lifeline.
He slammed the door.
She showered
the
and
sound
dressed in a
echoing
suit
in
of
the
charcoal
enclosed
gray,
space.
simple
They
and
want her
authoritative.
signature.
They
No
want her
jewels
blessing.
today.
Margaret
No
nodded
masks.
slowly. She walked
So
out
there
of
is
her
no one
apartment
else.
and into the
No
private
one,
elevator that
Arthur
descended
whispered,
directly
leaning
to
back
the
against the
executive
leather
floor
seat.
of Vance Consulting.
He closed his eyes.
The doors opened
irony
to the
was
sound of
suffocating.
quiet productivity.
They had disowned
Her
her for being
assistant, Sarah,
inadequate.
was already
They
at
had
her
cast her
desk,
out for lacking
organizing
the status
files
to
with a
support
calm
their legacy.
efficiency that mirrored
And now
Eleanor's
their
own.
legacy existed
Good morning,
solely
Ms.
because she
Vance,
allowed
Sarah
it.
said, standing
She
up.
was the air they
The
breathed.
team is ready
the
in
ground
the
they stood
conference
on.
room. The girl
Victor
they
is
called a
waiting.
distraction was
Good
the
morning,
only thing
Sarah,
keeping them
Eleanor
from
replied,
oblivion. handing over
Where do we
her
go
coat.
now?
Coffee,
Margaret
please.
asked softly.
Black.
Arthur opened
And bring
his
the
eyes.
sterling files.
He looked out the
She
window
walked
at
into the
passing
conference
city.
room. He
where
saw the
Victor
Vance
and
Global
3
Tower
senior
in the
partners
distance,
were seated
gleaming
around a
like
sleek
a beacon.
glass table.
We go to them.
They
he
stood as
said.
she entered.
We stopped
not out of
fighting the
fear,
current,
but out of
we
respect.
swim with it.
Please
Will Lucas
sit,
be there?
Eleanor said.
Lucas is
taking
always
her
there.
seat at the head of
Arthur
the
said.
table.
He's the
She
bridge.
opened the folder Sarah
If we want to
placed in
cross
front
this
of her.
chasm,
The
we have to
numbers were
walk
stark.
over him.
The
Sterling
drive to
Industries
the watch
stock
shop
had
was
dropped
silent.
another 15%.
The neighborhood was
overnight.
familiar.
The
But it
bank
felt
had
different
formally
now.
declared a default.
Before,
on the
it was a
primary
place
loan.
they avoided.
The merger
A
was
symbol of
officially
Lucas's
dead.
rebellion.
Victor looked at
Now
her,
it was
his
the command
expression
center of
serious.
their salvation.
The board at
The
Sterling
shop was
is
modest.
calling an
The sign
emergency
hand-painted.
meeting this
The
afternoon.
windows filled with clocks
They're
of
looking
all
for a
shapes and
scapegoat.
sizes.
Richard is
It was
trying
humble.
to blame the market.
It was real.
But everyone
Arthur
knows
stepped
it is
out
the
of the
dead
car
issue.
and looked at
Eleanor
the building.
ran her finger down
He
the
felt a
page,
surge of shame,
tracing the
hot
line
and prickly.
items. He was
And the
about to
employees?
ask for help from the
Are their
people
pensions
he had
secure?
tried to destroy.
Victor nodded.
He adjusted his
We have
tie,
structured the
a futile
acquisition
attempt to armor
so that the
himself.
operating subsidiaries
Margaret touched his
remain
arm.
intact.
Leave the
The
pride
staff
at the
will
door,
be paid.
Arthur. The
Just
benefits
for
will
today.
remain. He nodded.
That was her condition.
They walked to the door.
She would not let
The
Richard's
bell chimed
failure
as they
punish
entered.
the people who
The
had
smell
nothing
of
to do
oil
with
and
his
would
ego.
welcome them.
Good.
Lucas
Eleanor
was
said.
at the workbench.
She picked
a
up a
loop in
pen.
his eye.
Then we
working on a
proceed with the
delicate
foreclosure
mechanism.
notice.
Elena
Today,
stood nearby.
A silence
reviewing
fell
a
over the
tablet.
room.
They
It
both
was a
looked
decisive
up as the
moment.
Sterling
Starlings entered. Once that notice was filed, no one spoke. The process would be
The tension was
irreversible.
palpable.
Richard would lose the
weight
mansion
in the small room.
He would lose the
Lucas
symbol of his
removed the
power.
loop.
Standing
Are you
up
sure,
slowly.
Eleanor?
He didn't
Victor
smile,
asked
but he
softly.
didn't frown.
This will be public.
He waited. Your
Father,
name will be associated
Mother,
with his
Lucas
downfall.
said.
Eleanor
voice
looked
was
up,
neutral.
her eyes clear
Lucas,
and steady.
Arthur replied.
My name is
He looked
already
at Elena.
associated with this
Ms.
company,
Vance.
Victor.
Mr.
I am not
Sterling,
hiding anymore.
Elena said.
He made sure
She
the
didn't
world
offer a
knew
hand.
he kicked out his wife.
She didn't offer a seat.
Let the world know
She
she
waited
waited
for
for them
house.
to state their business.
She signed the document.
Arthur
with a
cleared
firm
his
stroke.
throat.
The
The
ink
ink dried
small in this
quickly,
room,
sealing
the
the
power
fate
dynamic
of the
had
property.
shifted so
She
completely
stood up
it was
and walked to the
disorienting.
window of the conference room.
We had a meeting with
The view
Chase
was
Bank
expansive,
today.
covering the
Elena
entire
nodded
city.
slightly.
She could
I
see the
heard.
hills where the mansion
They refused
stood,
the loan.
a white speck in the
Arthur
distance.
said.
The words
For
difficult
years,
to force out.
she had looked at
They
that
said-
house and
They
felt
said they
like
need
a
a
guest.
guarantee from Vance
She had walked
Global.
on those floors.
Elena
and felt
placed
like
the
an
tablet on
intruder.
the counter.
Now the
She
deed was
crossed
being
her arms.
transferred to Orion
And you want me to
Holdings.
provide it?
She would not just
We
be
need
a
the
visitor
capital for the
anymore.
upgrade.
She would be
Arthur
the
said.
owner. The
The
modular
irony
plan
was
not
Lucas
lost
suggested.
on her.
It
He
works.
had told her she was nobody.
But we can't fund it
He had
without
told her
access
she had
to
no
credit.
value without him.
Elena looked at
Now,
Lucas.
she held the title
Did
to
you
the
know
very
about
ground
this?
he stood on.
I suspected
It was not about
Lucas said.
revenge.
I
It
told
was
you
about
they would try to
correction.
find a way around.
The balance had been
The
tipped
market
too
is
far
tight.
for too long.
Elena
Sarah
turned her
knocked
gaze back
and
to
entered the
Arthur.
room.
Why
Miss
should
Vance,
I?
there is a
You
call
tried to
for
cut
you.
us off.
Line 1.
You tried to starve
It
us.
is Mr. Sterling.
You called me a liability.
The room went quiet.
Arthur
The
flinched.
partners looked at each
The
other.
truth of her words
Eleanor
was a
did
physical
not
blow.
flinch.
I was
She
wrong,
walked back
he
to the
said.
table and
The
picked up
admission
the
hung in
phone.
the air.
She did
heavy
not
and
sit
raw.
down.
I judged
Richard,
you by
she said.
standards that no
Her
longer
voice was
apply.
calm,
I
devoid of the
valued
warmth
money
she
over
used to
merit.
reserve for him.
I see that now.
Eleanor his.
And
Voice
Elena
was rough,
pressed.
strained.
Is this just
He
about
sounded
survival?
like he hadn't slept.
Or is it about
We
change?
need to talk.
It's
In
about
person.
survival. Please.
Arthur admitted.
There was a desperation there.
I want it
that
to be
pierced
about
through the phone
change.
line.
I don't
He
want
was
to
not
lose
commanding
the
her
company
anymore.
I don't want to
He
lose
was
my
begging.
son. There is
Elena
nothing to
studied
talk
him.
about, Richard.
She looked.
The papers have
Inside
been
the
filed.
Sterling residence.
You know that.
I
Arthur
can fix
Sterling
this,
was
he said
tying his
quickly.
tie in front
I
of
can
the
get the
mirror.
funding.
His
I can
reflection
buy back
looked
the
back
debt.
at him.
Just
Dark
give me
and
time.
unyielding.
Give us a
He
chance.
adjusted the knot.
Us, Eleanor
pulling it
repeated.
tight until it
The word
restricted
felt
his
foreign.
breathing slightly.
There is no us,
It felt
Richard.
appropriate. There is a creditor
Constriction.
and a debtor.
That was what
There
today
is a
was
landlord
about.
and a tenant.
Margaret entered the
You
room.
made sure of that
holding
when you
his
asked
jacket.
me to leave.
You don't have
I was
to do
angry,
this,
he said, his
she
voice
said
cracking.
softly.
I
You
was
could
under
claim
pressure.
illness.
I didn't
Let me
mean.
represent the family.
You meant exactly what
Arthur
you said.
turned to face her.
Eleanor interrupted
No.
gently.
If I hide,
You
I
said I
admit
was a
defeat.
distraction.
If I show
You
up,
said I was
admit
nothing.
change.
I believed
There is a
you.
difference.
So I left.
I will be there.
Now I am
I will
back,
sit in the
but
seat
not
they
as your
assigned me.
wife. And
As
I
your
will
owner.
listen. The
Arthur,
silence on the other
Margaret
end was
said,
heavy.
stepping closer.
She could hear his
Don't
breathing,
fight her.
shallow
Not
and rapid.
today.
Not
You are
in
enjoying
front of the
this, she
shareholders.
whispered.
You are
If you
enjoying
fight, you
watching me
lose.
fall.
If you
No,
collaborate,
Eleanor
you
said.
survive.
I am not
I
enjoying
know.
it. Arthur
I am
said,
witnessing
taking the
it.
jacket.
There is a
He
difference.
slipped his arms into
I do
the
not want you to
sleeve.
suffer, Richard.
I just hope she
I want you
remembers
to learn
that I built the walls.
And sometimes
she is now
learning
living in.
requires losing everything.
She knows, Margaret
She
said.
hung up the phone,
but
before
she's
he could
renovating the
respond.
house. She placed the
her.
receiver back
They
on the
arrived
cradle.
at the tower
Her
separately.
hand was steady.
A deliberate choice
She turned
to
to face
maintain
her team.
professional boundaries.
They were watching her with awe.
Elena and Lucas
She had just
entered
spoken
through
to the
main
man
lobby.
who was once the most
security
powerful
guards
figure
nodded
in their
respectfully.
industry. Their
And
badges
she had
dismissed
updated
him
with the
like
new
a Vance
marketer.
global logos.
Back to work.
The
she said
elevator ride
softly.
to the boardroom
We have a
floor was
transition to
swift.
manage.
When the doors
Ensure
opened,
the staff at
the
Sterling
hallway
knows
was
their
lined
jobs
with
are
assistants
safe.
and junior
I want a meeting
executives.
with the union
They
representatives
whispered as
by
Elena
noon.
passed, their eyes
Yes,
wide.
Ms. Vance, Victor
She
said.
didn't look at them.
He looked at her
She walked
with a new
steady
kind of
pace.
respect.
Her heels
You are
clicking on
handling
the
this with
marble.
more grace
Lucas
than he ever
walked
did.
beside her, not
Eleanor
behind.
smiled, a
He
small,
was her partner,
tired smile.
not her assistant.
I had a good teacher.
Inside the antechamber
Myself.
to the boardroom,
She walked out of the
Arthur and
conference
Margaret
room
were
and
already
into her
waiting.
office.
Arthur
She
stood
closed
by the
the
window
door
and leaned
looking
against
out
it
at the
for
gray
a moment.
sky,
Letting the
Margaret
mask
sat
slip,
on a bench,
her hands
reviewing a
trembled
tablet.
slightly. When
was
Elena and
easy to be
Lucas
strong in
entered,
front
Arthur
of the
turned.
team.
The
It was
air in
easy
the
to
room
be
shifted.
cold on the phone.
The history
But
between
inside,
them,
there
the
was a
rejection,
grief she
the
had not
pain, the
expected.
reconciliation. She was not
Hung in
grieving
the
Richard.
silence.
She was
Ms.
grieving
Vance,
the time she
Arthur
had lost,
said,
nodding formally.
The years of silence.
Mr. Sterling, the
Elena
ideas she had
replied.
swallowed.
Ready,
The person
as
she
I'll
had
ever
hidden,
be.
Arthur
She walked
said.
to her desk
He looked
and
at
opened
Lucas.
a drawer.
You look
Inside
well,
was a
son.
small framed
You too,
photo
Dad,
of the
Lucas
mansion.
said.
He
Taken
wanted
on the
to
day
say
they
more
moved
to
in.
bridge the gap.
She had been
but
so
the
happy
moment
then.
demanded protocol.
She had believed in the
double
dream.
doors to the
She
boardroom
picked up the
were opened
photo
by
and
an
looked at
assistant.
it. It was
The
just a
board is
building,
seated,
the
bricks and
assistant
mortar.
announced. It held no
Elena
magic.
took a breath.
The magic
This
had
was
been
it.
in her hope.
The point of no
and she had
return.
wasted it on a man
She looked at
who could not
Lucas,
see it, and he gave her
She
a
placed the
small,
photo face
encouraging
down
nod.
in the drawer and
She stepped
closed it.
forward. She would
Arthur
not look
followed
at it
again.
step behind. She sat at her
Margaret
desk
followed
and
him.
opened her laptop.
They entered the room
There
together.
were emails to answer.
The boardroom was
contracts
vast,
to review.
the table
a
long
company
and
to
polished
run.
to a mirror
Vance
shine.
Consulting was thriving.
Around it sat the
They had
shareholders,
just secured
the
a new
external
contract
advisors,
with the
and
government
senior
agency.
management.
They were
20
expanding
pairs of
into
eyes
renewable
turned to the
energy.
door.
She
The
was
murmur
building
of
something that
conversation
would
died
last
instantly.
something that did
Everyone
not
knew the
rely on the
rumors.
ego of one man.
Everyone knew the Vance
She typed
global
quickly,
acquisition
her
was
fingers
final.
flying over the
But
keys.
seeing her walk in,
the rhythm of the
alongside
work
the
soothed her,
Sterlings made it real.
This was where she belonged.
Elena walked to the
in
head
the center
of the
action.
The seat
not on
there
the
was
periphery.
empty.
It had
Sarah
been Arthur's
buzzed on
seat
the
for
intercom.
30 years.
The car is ready
today
in
it belonged
advance
to the majority
for the property
stakeholder.
inspection.
She pulled out
Eleanor
the chair
paused.
and sat down.
The inspection.
She placed her folder
It was
on
the
the
final
table.
step before the
Lucas
formal
took the
handover.
seat to her right. She needed to
Arthur
see the
took the
house
seat
one
to
more
her
time
left.
before the locks
The symbolism
were
was
changed.
not lost on
She needed to
anyone.
walk the halls.
The old
as
guard
owner.
was now flanking
Stand
the
up,
new
she
power.
said.
I
Arthur
am
sat
coming.
down slowly.
She gathered her
He
things.
felt the eyes of the board
She took
on
her
him.
coat from the rack.
He expected pity.
She looked at herself in the
expected
mirror
scorn.
on the wall.
Instead,
The
he
woman
saw
staring back
curiosity.
was tired.
They were
but her
waiting to
eyes
see
were
how he
bright.
would react.
She was no
Would he
longer the
sulk?
shadow.
Would he argue?
She was the substance.
He straightened his spine.
She walked out of the office.
He would not give them the
staff
satisfaction
lined the
of
hallway
seeing
as
him
she
break.
passed.
Elena
Not because
opened
she
her
demanded
folder.
it. Good
But
morning,
because they wanted
she
to
said.
show their support.
Her voice was clear.
She nodded to them,
projecting to the back of the
each
room
one
without effort.
Thank you, she
Thank
said
you
to
for
a
being
junior
here.
analyst. We have a lot
Good
of work
on
to
the
do.
quarterly report.
She began to speak.
Thank you, she said
outlining
to
the
security
roadmap
guard
for the next quarter.
Have a good weekend.
She spoke of
She
efficiency,
treated them like
of
people,
modernization,
not assets.
of ethical labor
That was the
practices.
difference.
She
That was
didn't
why her
mention the
company
past.
stood strong while
She
his
didn't
fell.
mention the debt.
She reached the
She
elevator.
focused on the future.
Victor was waiting
As she
there.
spoke,
Are
Lucas
you sure you
watched
want to
his
go
father.
alone?
Arthur
He
was
asked.
listening.
I can come
He
with
wasn't
you.
taking notes
No,
aggressively.
Eleanor said, nor was he
I need to do
staring
this
out the
myself.
window.
He
It
was
is
listening.
closure. The
Occasionally,
elevator
he
doors
nodded.
opened. It was a
She
small
stepped
gesture,
inside.
but to Lucas,
Good luck, Victor
it felt
said.
like a mountain moving.
She smiled.
Halfway
I do
through
not
the
need luck,
presentation,
Victor.
a shareholder
deed.
raised his hand.
The doors closed.
Mr. Henderson,
And she descended.
the same man
The building
who had
rushed
questioned
past the
Elena
glass
months ago,
walls.
a
Ms.
blur
Vance,
of steel
he
and
began.
light. Regarding
She
the
thought about
supply
Richard
chain
again.
restructuring,
He was likely
are we
packing
confident
his things
that
now.
the Sterling
The
legacy
bank would be
suppliers
arriving
can
soon
meet
to
the new
seal the
standards?
offices.
Or
He
will
would
we
have
need to
nowhere
look
to go.
externally? The mansion
Elena
was the
paused.
only home he had
She
known
looked at
for
Arthur.
20 years.
Mr. Sterling,
She felt a
she
pang
said.
of sympathy.
This
but she
falls under your
suppressed it.
oversight.
He had
What
chosen
is your
this path.
assessment?
He had
The
chosen
room went
pride
silent.
over partnership.
It was a test.
He had chosen power
She was
over
giving
love.
him the floor.
She could not
She was
save
allowing
him
him
from
to
his own
lead
choices.
within her framework.
She could only ensure that
Arthur
the
looked
collateral
at her,
damage was
surprised.
minimized.
He hadn't
The
expected
elevator
to be
reached the
consulted
lobby.
publicly.
The driver
He
held
looked
the
at the
door
board,
open,
then back at
to the
Elena.
Sterling estate.
The
she
legacy
said.
suppliers are
The
capable.
driver nodded. Arthur said.
The car
his voice
pulled out
steady.
into traffic.
But they need investment.
Eleanor watched the city
The
pass
modular
by.
upgrade plan
She
will
saw the
allow them to
billboards
meet
with
the new
Richard's face
standards
on them,
without being replaced.
promoting the merger that would
I
never
recommend we
happen.
proceed.
They
with
would
the
have to take
internal
those down
upgrade.
soon.
Elena
The image
nodded.
would be outdated.
Agreed.
Just like the
Mr.
man.
Sterling's team
She
will
leaned.
lead the implementation.
Lucas felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about the business decision. It was about the respect. His father was being treated as an asset, not a liability. And Elena was treating him with dignity. The meeting continued for another hour. Decisions were made. Votes were cast. Every time Elena asked for input, Arthur provided it. Every time Arthur